Hey guys, tonight we're going back to a time when smelling like death wasn't a metaphor. It was just normal. Welcome to the Middle Ages, a period of knights' castles, and most importantly, overwhelming, unrelenting, no-searing stench. We're talking a time when the concept of deodorant was about as real as dragons, and people genuinely thought touching water. It's gonna get pretty grimy. And honestly, you probably won't survive this. Not with your old factory system intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure. Drop your city on the time you're listening in the comments. I love seeing how far this strange little history community stretches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by imagining the first thing to hit you as you walk into a medieval town. Not the sight of towering stone walls or knights clanking down the street, but the smell. Your nose wrinkles involuntarily. It's not one smell. Not really. It's a horrible symphony. Rotting. Human. Add bacon to layers of wool. Horse manure. Decaying vegetables. On the unmistakable tang of urine baking in the finest sun. The outer cleans like a second skin, and you're not even through the city gates. The truth is, hygiene and the medieval period was a concept held together by two strings and a prayer. People simply didn't bathe regularly. Most folks, rich or poor, maybe washed once or twice a year. The idea of a daily shower would have been not just foreign, but suspicious. Water, after all, had this nasty habit of being filled with disease. And so many believed it was better to not open your pores too. Just keep that dirt sealed in. Thank you very much. Even the very word clean was different back then. Mud and brush away the mire, crusty bits from your tunic. But there's no bar of soap. No shampoo. No Lutheran. The closest thing to a skincare routine involved maybe dabbing your face with a rose water. If you are extremely fancy. Well, scrubbing with ashes and sand. If you were a peasant. It was part of you. Let's not forget the animals. Chickens on the foot. Put pigs waddling through alleys and oxen, leaving fresh gifts on every corner. Waste management didn't exist. People threw their sewage. Human waste directly into the streets. That's not just some myth for drama. You literally hear shouts of "Loo" from upper windows, which loosely translates to "watch out for the toilet water." Moments later, a bucket of what would be dumped straight into the all. If you are unlucky enough to be walking by, congratulations. You're now part of the ecosystem. Make it even more. The streets themselves were often made of compressed dirt and straw soaked in all that refuse. Imagine summer, the sun beating down on these makeshift paths, warming up layers of decomposing filth. And creating a kind of low-grade biological weapon. Choose what grade either. Usually leather flats with thin soles. You felt everything squishing underfoot. The real medieval experience was basically a daily fear factor challenge. Now here's a quirky. In some regions, people believed that strong body odor was actually a sign of health. You smell like a working human. That was a good thing. There were even cases where people deliberately avoided masking their scent with herbs or perfumes. Vain. Sin. In fact, too much effort toward cleanliness often got lumped in with pride. One of the 7 deadly sins. So you see a guy who's sparkling clean. He's probably up to something. There's actually an ongoing scholarly debate about just how dirty people truly were. Tell me stories argue that medieval folk weren't as disgustingly filthy as we love to think. There's a lot of what we know comes from Victorian-era writers trying to make themselves feel superior. They claimed there was some washing, some dental care, chewing on mint or sage to freshen breath. Add a few scattered bathhouses that weren't all brothels. Others say that's just wishful thinking, and the truth is closer to the nose. Wrinkling nightmare we imagine. Either way, The fact that the debate exists is a lot about how complex the topic is, and how much of it still lingers in our cultural nose memory. And the worst, people got used to it. You, at your nose goes blind after a while do. You have a present stink isn't shocking it's comfort. The familiar bouquet of village. When a red traveler arrived smelling of soap or herbs, people were just as likely to recoil as they were to admire. Cleanliness was alien, suspicious, possibly heretical. But let's rewind for a second and imagine you're waking up in a modest medieval home. The air inside is thick with the smells of unwashed bodies, damp straw, last night's stew, and something vaguely mild. You open a wooden shut, add another glass, window, breathe in a waft of whatever the neighbors tossed out their window that morning. Your own chamber. Pot needs empty, and it's your turn. You carry it down the narrow stairs past the fire where the breakfast porridge is bubbling, probably with insects in it. Can you step out into the street? Guadalupe. And how are the contents? Into the alley. A goat bleats in the distance. Someone's yelling. The smell hits you again, and you. It's just another day in the most pungent era in human history. You probably think bars are a basic human right, maybe even a ritual. A hot soak with bubbles, candles, maybe a little music. But in the Middle Ages, bathing was something you did so rarely it had to be marked on the calendar. And even then, only if it didn't raise eyebrows. You want to clean yourself, but not too often. Will people start wondering what you've been up to. It was straight up controversial. In early medieval Europe, public and private bars were relatively common. Leftovers from the Romans. You're obsessed with bathing. What is the centuries trudged on that obsession curdled? Are the 13th and 14th centuries. People have begun to see water as more of a threat than a blessing. The logic was weird, but it went like this. Opening your skin's paws through hot water made you more vulnerable to disease. In a world where plague and bad that were considered legitimate causes of death, that sounded like a hard pass. So most folks opted out. Maybe they'd special water on their face and hands before mass or dinner, out of social obligation. Real, the full body kind, was reserved for very specific occasions, religious holidays, important life events like weddings. Or actual medical treatment. Otherwise, you just marinated in your own oils and hope no one noticed. Spoiler, they noticed. Even those lucky enough to have access to a tub often used it sparingly. Might be dragged in once or twice a year, filled with heated water by hand bucket from a pot over the fire. Families reuse the same water in turns, starting with the head of the household and working their way down the pecking order. By the time the youngest kid got in, the water was a sad lukewarm soup of soap, residue. Skin flakes, unquestionable floating. And yes, that's where the phrase "don't throw the baby out with the bathwater" allegedly comes from. The water was that murky. In wealthier homes, there were slightly more luxurious options. Portable, wooden tabs lined with servants to fill and empty them. Herbs and flower petals added too. But even these said, pops are only used a few times a year. I think castles bathing often meant being wheeled into the kitchen where it was warm and wet. A list of a fire hazard. Nothing screams royalty like sitting naked in a wooden tub while someone stirs stew a few feet away. Public bathhouses were a thing, but complicated. At first, they were just places to clean up. Men and women bathed together. The vibe was casual. But it didn't stay that way. Both houses quickly became hot spots for gossip, gambling, and plenty of things the church frowned upon. If you were heading to the public, that's too often. People started asking questions. Will you just there for the show? Will something steamy? In many towns, bathhouses were eventually shut down, not for being unsanitary. Before being too fun. Quirky fact in. Some bathhouses actually served food and drink. While you soaked. Imagine sitting in warm water, sipping wine and snacking on roast chicken. Google half-naked strangers. Float past dot. It sounds like a spa mixed with a medieval food court. Totally normal behavior. Apparently dot until the plague. Then it was like, are we all just sharing germs? And soup water dot the idea of communal bathing tanked overnight. And so did any momentum toward routine cleanliness. There's an academic tug of war around this one. 2. Some scholars argue that medieval people did care about bathing, and that personal hygiene was more nuanced than we think. They point to bathhouse records, soap-making guild, uneven court documents discussing bathing, etiquette. Others roll their eyes and point to the sheer amount of filth described in first-hand accounts. Complaints from travelers allows, literally banning people from tossing waste into the street. Because it kept happening. The truth as usual is probably somewhere in the middle. Some bathed, occasionally most and single quotes of course. Some folks were all in on fill. On purpose there were monks and ascetics who believed that denying the body meant saving the soul. These were the people who thought not bathing at all was a form of devotion. Pain was cleansing. One famous monk supposedly bragged about not washing his feet for over 40 years. An achievement show, but not one you want to smell. Meanwhile, bathing is a luxury kept hanging around in certain circles. Knights, nobles, and even royalty sometimes threw bathing parties with elaborate scented oils, music, and servants standing by with towels. But again, these were events. Statements. That's not rude. King Louis XIV of France, just barely out of the medieval era, was said to bathe only twice in his entire life. His physicians actually warned against, fearing it would weaken him. Instead, they recommended linen. Shifts changed often to absorb bodily impurities, so kind of like a human paper towel system. And when people did bathe, it wasn't always for hygiene. Sometimes it was spiritual. Full body immersion was used for religious purification. Especially around Easter and other feast days. There are also ceremonial baths before marriage, which were less about cleanliness and more about symbolizing a fresh start. Washing yourself meant washing your sins, your past, your old life. Not you standing in that world, or maybe lucky enough to find a bathhouse still open in a mid-sized town. You walk in and find a steamy room filled with chattering voices. Folk, glass windows if you're lucky, and the constant splash of wooden buckets. Is a strong sense of lavender and rosemary. When to Mars, the human stub underneath it. You can still detect that call. Medieval. Someone nearby is having their back scrubbed with a course. Another person dunks their head under a stream of water being poured from a pot. There's a fire blazing in the corner. The worker is busy stoking it while sweat gleams on their forehead. For a second, it feels almost modern. Will my civil. Then you remember. You'll probably be wearing the same undergarments for another month. And when you finally step out, towel around your waist. Your skin warm and clean for the first time in ages. Someone looks at you sideways. Too clean. Suspiciously clean. Better watch that one. They probably read books. 2. Text miraculously. You're walking back to your home through a narrow medieval alley. The wooden buildings leaning so close you could probably steal someone's bread through their window if you were feeling bold. But your brief flirtation with cleanliness is about to be tested, because this isn't just a street. It's a toilet, a trash chute, and a general-purpose filth delivery system, all rolled into one. See, in medieval towns. Is pushed to pissable. Plumbing wasn't a thing. At least not in the way you'd recognize. There were no underground sewers, neatly tucked away beneath the pavement. No gleaming white porcelain to whisk your business away with a whoosh. If you had to go, you reach for your trusty chamber. Ceramic or wooden bowl, tucked under the bed or in a quiet corner. When did your business. Simple. Efficient. Because now you've got a full chamber. And where does it go? Out the window, of course. The technique had a whole ritual to it. Before flinging a day's worth of bodily Waste into the street. You are expected to shout something like God Lou from the French Regatta. Low dot, watch out for the water dot, to warn any poor soul walking by. The problem was not everyone bothered to shout. Well, they mumbled at dot, well, they just didn't care. Which meant walking below. Windows was a high-stakes gamble every single day. People learned to hug walls. And scary quickly through alleys dot, the city wasn't just noisy and smelly dot. It was dangerous. Dot, now, picture this. You're wearing a hooded cloak dot, it's raining slightly. And as you pass beneath an upstairs window, a splash. It's your shoulder. You freeze. You know exactly what just happened. But you don't scream. You don't even look up. You just keep walking, trying to convince yourself it was rain. Maybe it was. Probably wasn't. You'll never know. What were called guard ropes. Sort of medieval indoor toilet dot, except the toilet part is generous dot. It was just a wooden seat with a hole, usually built into the outer wall of the house or castle dot, so the waste dropped directly down into a pit. If you were lucky, weren't just for defense. They're also very literal. Crap-filled moats. Take a moment to appreciate the next time you see a fantasy castle in a movie. Castles also had murder, which country to their name, weren't always for pouring boiling oil on invaders. Sometimes they were just architectural features. The leg guards or servants drop waste from upper levels into the world below dot, efficiency dot, medieval style. And it wasn't just human dot, everything went out the window. Spoiled food, dirty water dot, blood from slaughtered animals. Ashes from the dot, all of it landed in the same narrow alleyways and mingled into a fetid stew that soaked into the dirt roads dot. Add in the waste from roaming animals. Dogs, horses, and you've got dot, the kind of environment that can only be described as logically hostile. But here's the really fun. This was normal dot, municipal governments, when they existed, tried to manage dumping waste into the street. Sure. But they were really enforced, and even when they were, it was like trying to put a band-aid on a volcano. A few towns did build public latrines, or D.play, quickly filled up and overflowed, and there was no real sanitation system to carry it away dot, so unless you were living near a river, or you could at least toss things downstream and pretend it disappeared, you are stuck with the stink. Now let's not pretend everyone was just gross and lazy. Floors are often covered in rushes or straw to soak up messes. Those rushes were changed dot occasion dot, usually when they started to rot or attract too many insects. And by chang dot, we mean someone scooped the top layer, pushed the rest of the side, and threw some fresh straw over it. Problem solved dot, spell neutralized. A quirky detail here dot, turn off the class household sprinkled herbs into the rushes on their floors. Lavender, rosemary, or chamomile dot to help combat the OD. For really? That just turned the place into a medieval Glade plug-in. Covering up the stench with a more polite stench dot, it was like pudding. What's a candle in a porta potty? And the smells weren't just passive. Place shaped how people lived. You didn't just smell the town, navigated by it. You could tell if you were nearing the butcher, the tanner, or the fishmonger long before you saw their signs. Your nose guided you like a GPS, warning you of particularly nasty intersections and allies. Open-air bathrooms dot, children learn these olfactory landmarks. Early dot, it was part of growing up. There's actually an open scholarly debate about just how awful it really was. Some historians believe the descriptions we have come mostly from disgusted visitors. Merchants, pilgrims, or diplomats from cleaner regions who weren't used to the urban squall. Others argue the townsfolk knew it was terrible. I just didn't have the means to fix it. They even found records of neighbors suing each other over waste disputes. Your privy overflows into my courtyard dot, and now my chickens are walking funny. Whatever the truth, one thing certain dot, medieval cities were an olfactory battlefield dot, and you're just trying to survive another stroll down Grope Lane or Shambles Street. Both real names, by the way, some of which survive today. You breathe through your mouth, try not to step in anything too warm. Remind yourself that this was home for millions of people. Over hundreds of years. By the time you get back to your front door, your once clean self is already tainted. Your boots are damp with mystery. You've picked up a new layer of scent, one that clings to your clothes like smoke from a fire. But there's no escaping. This is just how life smells. And tonight, you'll fill your own chamber pots, slide it under the bed, and try to sleep, knowing that somewhere above you. So, let's keep walking. You're in the middle of a medieval city now, and it doesn't matter which one. London, Paris, colonial Florence. The scent hits the same. There's a reason even contemporary writers refer to these places as nice, which is a fancy old way of saying, wow, this smells like a dead goat inside a burning out house. And it wasn't just bad, it was constant. From sunrise to sundown, the stink was baked into the very air, woven into the fog, clinging to your cloak. You didn't visit the medieval city with your nose. You survived it with grit and nasal resignation. The layout doesn't help. Streets of narrow. Sometimes no wider than an arm span. The upper stories of houses leaning toward each other, darkening the path below and trapping. Smells like a giant wooden lung with no exhale. There's no breeze down here. What rises from the gutters stays in the gutters. The buildings themselves are made of timber. Put plaster and materials that soak up moisture, mold. And the breath of everyone inside them. What in particular holds on to odors like it's collecting sins. And boy, are there plenty to choose from. People live elbow to elbow. Whole family is crammed into a single room. Usually shared with their animals. Chickens wander freely. Pigs root under the table. And if you're particularly lucky, you might get to share your straw bed with a goat in winter. Yes, you're starting to understand the problem. It's not that medieval folks were dirtier than we are. Is that there was simply no where the dirt to go. When everyone's living on top of each other. Sanitation is less of a personal choice and more of an architectural tragedy. And let's talk about waste, because it's not just in the chamber. Pots and gutters. It's everywhere. Butchers dump piles of awful. Animal. Watch bones. Who right outside their shop. Blood runs in little rivulets toward the center of the road, or mingles with sloven rainwater and forms what might generously be called a puddle. Bakers toss scorched bread. Fishmongers scrape spoiled scales into the gutter. What's the time his boil animal hides in fats of urine and lime and slap the leftover sludge onto the street like it's nobody's business. Spoil. It is everybody's business when it seeps into your shoes. The city stinks because it's alive. In the worst possible way. There are no garbage trucks, no sanitation crews. No hazmat suits. Is a vape concept of street, usually done by someone dragging a branch behind. But it's more ceremonial than effective. It just smells the funk into new patterns. I don't even think about asking where all the animal carcasses go after they die in the streets. The answer is not far. But here's a quirky twist. Some cities tried to keep things in places like Paris. Lowe's. What's the required people to clean the area in front of their homes once a week? Markets. We're technically supposed to dispose of. What's the designated. But investment was spotty at. Most officials were corrupt or busy. And the fines for dumping fish heads into the street with small potatoes compared to the effort of holding them across town to a stinking ref. Even rivers, those glorious natural drainage systems, weren't safe. The Thames, the Seine, and the Rhine were all tapped out, not just for drinking, but also for dumping human waste. Slaughterhouse refuse, laundry runoff. And occasionally whole corpses all found their way into the water. The phrase "don't drink downstream" wasn't just common sense. It was a life-saving mantra. Waterborne illnesses like dysentery, cholera, and typhoid were rampant. But since no one had microscopes, people just blamed the air. Will their neighbor's weird-smelling stew Which brings us to one of the most enduring debates among historians. Were medieval cities always this? Some argue that things weren't as bleak as we imagine. The medieval folks adapted to their environment. That the worst conditions only appeared during plagues or famine, and that smaller towns were often cleaner than major trade hubs. Others say that's wishful thinking, light, romanticizing a garbage. The truth is probably a mix. Some neighborhoods may have been better maintained, especially near cathedrals or wealthy homes. But most of the city. In a way, smell was the ultimate class div. The rich lived upwind. Put on hills, fresh water or gardens. The homes had higher windows, cleaned the floors, and fewer pigs on the foot. They lived in the stink's front yard. If you were lucky, you had a thatch roof that only leaked some of the time, and a dirt floor thick enough to plant onions in. Forget it. Backyard. Your view is the neighbor's. And your front stoop was the neighborhood's unofficial dumping ground. Somehow, people lived. Not just survive, but actually thrived. Markets. Bustled. Bells rang. Children played hopscotch in the same street. Did fish cuts hours earlier. The stink. It was part of the background noise, like traffic today. After a while, you just didn't notice it. People developed what we now call olfactory fatigue. Your nose gets tired and stops noticing. If you think about it, it's probably the only reason medieval life was psychologically bare. Picture yourself walking into a crowded tavern now. You open the heavy wooden door and get hit with a wave of heat, sweat, smoke, ale, and roast. It's like breathing through a damp wool. You push your way through the crowd. Someone's singing. Someone else is vomiting quietly in the corner. Dog is licking up scraps under the table. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed humans and a faint undertone of mildew. This is comfort. This is normal. And everyone around you is smiling. You sit down, order a cup of something vaguely alcoholic, and raise your mug with the others. Somewhere, a lute starts playing off key. The stench is part of the soundtrack now, a character in its own right. Not invited, but never leaving. Now let's narrow things down to a single unfortunate body part. Your mouth. Because if you think medieval streets were rough, just wait until you get a whiff of medieval. Dental hygiene in the Middle Ages was a strange cocktail of superstition, desperation. And share. If eyes are the window to the soul, then miles were more like the open sewer. Teeth were expected to rot. It was. By the time someone reached their late 20s or 30s, they were often already missing a few, lacking molar, crumbling in sizes. Inflamed gum. It was basically a dental horror film playing in slow motion inside every mouth. Cavities weren't treated. They were in. If a tooth hurt badly enough, someone yank, possibly using tongs, maybe without warning, and almost certainly without any anesthetic. Screamed into a. I hope you didn't faint from the pain. Well, the infection that followed. But what really haunts you is the breath. Medieval breath was the kind of thing that could peel paint off a monastery wall. People, while brushing their teeth with minty toothpaste twice a day. There were no flossing routines, no tongue scrapers, no emergency packs of gum in their purse. If you wanted to freshen up, you might chew on a twig. Literally. Certain types of twigs have natural antibacterial properties. Can we use like primitive toothbrushes? People would know one end into fibers and rub their teeth with it. Surprisingly effective in some ways, but still miles away from modern dental care. Some folks robbed ashes. Little crushed herbs on their. Sounds promising, until you realize that grit wears enamel down like sandpaper. Combine that with a diet heavy on coarse bread, tough meat. Android legume, and your teeth had a life expectancy shorter than most medieval kings. Speaking of diet, let's get into it, because what you eat plays a big role in how your breath smells. Medieval Europeans loved onions, garlic leeks, and cured meats. That's a lot of sulfur. Atom mead, ale, and the occasional hunk of blue. Veins cheese. And you're basically building a mouth that smells like a compost heap set on fire. And remember, no refrigeration. Spoilage. Was, if something was a little off, vinegar. Problems. Feel stomach maybe. Feel. Even close. What's more disturbing is how breath was tied to medicine. In the humoral system, which guided medieval medical theory. Doctors believed your breath reflected the balance of your bodily fluids. A foul smell might indicate an excess of black. Spell Oliver. They try to fix you with bloodletting purgatives or bizarre mouthwashes made from wine honey and herb. One such mixture involved boiling sage and vinegar and using it to rinse your mouth. Not terrible in theory, but when the alternative is pulling teeth with pliers made for horses, it's your best case scenario. Quirky. In certain circles. Mouth charms. These were little spells or prayers people would recite while holding specific herbs. To supposedly drive away tooth pain and bonus. Smelly. You might whisper a Latin phrase while clutching a clove. I'll sleep with a tiny sachet of rosemary tied around your neck. It was like medieval aromatherapy meets DEZ. Sprint superstition. Did it work? Emotionally, maybe. Plague factory? Absolutely not. There's an ongoing debate among historians about how bad medieval dental health actually was. Some point to skeletal remains with surprisingly intact teeth, arguing that lower sugar intake helped keep. Speak to KFB. After all, they didn't have soda candy. Or caramel FRAPPE. Howdoes argue that any benefit from diet was cancelled out by poor hygiene and rough food. Grinding grain with stone tools, often tiny bits of grit in bread, which basically turned every bite into a dental sand. That'll wear down enamel real quick, and if you were unlucky enough to develop an abscess, one of those swollen, painful infections under the tooth, you either suffered in silence. I went to a barber surgeon. Not a dentist. There were no dentists. You sat down, tilted your head back. And hoped the man wielding the metal hook had a steady hand. I didn't just come from hacking off someone else's. By the way, kissing in medieval Europe, not as cute as you think. People did kiss on the cheeks, the hands, and yes, occasionally on the lips. But it wasn't romantic in the modern sense. Courtly love was full of rules and idealization. Real mouth-to-mouth kissing was rare, especially between strangers. Probably because, let's be honest, it was a full sensory experience in the worst possible way. Imagine leaning in, only to be greeted by a wave of mead breath and visible tada. Build. That's not sparks flying. That's your soul leaving your body. And, just like the general stench of the city, people got used to it. Your breath wasn't judged unless it was extra offensive. Kind of offensive. People went walking around doing breath check. They were too busy not dying from infected wounds and crop. Fail used to worry if your teeth smelled like fermented goat stew. You and this time are doing your best. Maybe you chew a sprig of parsley. After dinner. Will rinse with a bitter herbal concoction. But your teeth are already worn down. One molar is starting to and you've been ignoring it, hoping it goes away. Eventually, someone's going to yank it. Your BR, somehow, will only get worse after the gaping wound is left to fester in the cool. Medieval are. Tonight. You lie down on your straw mattress, mouth dry from the smoky air and mead. Breathe so thick you could slice it. And you think, maybe tomorrow, you'll find some mint. Or maybe not. Because honestly, you've got bigger things to worry about, like catching the... We're getting peed on from a second-story window. Let's talk class. Because while everyone in the middle ages share the same general aroma of suffering, levels to the stink, peasants and nobles might have both smelled like they fought a mud wrestling match with a dead sheep. But how they got there was a whole different journey. And weirdly enough, the lower class often came out of it a little Less gross. At least when it came to actual hygiene. Don't be too shocked. Picture yourself as a peasant. You live in a rural village. Maybe an hour's walk from the nearest town. Your house is one room, built of wattle and daub. With a thatched roof that leaks of a bird. So much as looks at it wrong. Your floor is dirt. Your bed is straw. Your hair is smoke from the fire pit in the middle of the room. Those chimneys is still some fancy newfangled idea for rich people. Somehow, you might actually be cleaner than a noble living in a massive stone castle. Why? Because you've got access to something magical. A river. Peasants bathed in streams or ponds, often as part of their daily routine. Washing yourself wasn't fancy or ceremonial. It was just practical. After a hard day digging fields, you'd strip off your grind-caked tunic and splash around in the cold water. Sure, you aren't using organic lavender body wash or exfoliating with sea, but at least you were rinsing off the sweat, and what was free, refreshing, and nobody was going to lecture you about opening your pores to the devil. Close garage too sometimes. Women would like garments to the riverbanks, beat them on rocks, scrub them with lyre ashes, and hang them to dry in the sun. What's the process rough on fabric? Absolutely. Clothes didn't last long, and most people only owned one or two sets anyway. Play could it be walking around in moldy wool? Now contrast that with the noble class. If you're born into money, you live in a castle or manor. Beautiful on the outside, but connect to Kia stone. Refrigerator on the inside. It's cold. Draft. The stone wall. Sweat, moisture. Mold grows in the corners. The only warmth comes from a fire that fills the rooms with a haze of smoke. Turn the faint odor of charred rat droppings. You think you'd be cleaner because you're rich. Nobles didn't do their own washing. The clothes were made of fine, delicate fab, velvet, silk, brocade. Cleaning them was risky. Instead of washing them, perfume them. That's right. If a noble's gown started to reek like sour wine and body GRE, and call it a day. Over time, the layers of perfume and filth created something like scented armor. Music from a distance. Horrifying up close. Bathing. Nobles did it. But again, rarely. It was a production. They needed servants to hold buckets of water, heat them over a fire, fill a wooden table in a private chamber. Then add herbs and petals. For fragrance. We could take hours. So they mostly relied on linen, shifts worn close to the skin. The theory was that the linen draw out the dirt and oils, absorbing them so the skin could stay clean. Cheaper than self-awareness. A noble might go, what's without touching actual water. When you peeled off their lair, it wasn't so much undressing as archaeological excavation. The worst offenders were sometimes the most powerful people. Royals were practically allergic to soap. Some rulers, like Queen Isabella of Castile, was said to have only bathed twice in their entire lives, which well possibly exaggerated gives you an idea of the era's cleanliness standards for the elite. Quirky. Some nobles had personal center assistants. These were servants responsible for maintaining their master's aromatic aura, freshening up their linens with perfumes. Holding sachets of herbs under their noses. And even discreetly waving fans to keep their body odor from building into a visible fog. If you're imagining a medieval hype man with a bag of lavender, you're not far off. Of course, all of this filth disguised as finery created a strange kind of social dynamic. Nobles believed their status made them immune to common dirt, both literal and moral. If a peasant stank, it was because they were coarse and lowborn. If a noble stank, it was just a scent of importance. They'd be dripping sweat in velvet. Rob. The hair greasy on the heavy hats. The breath of cocktail of rotten wine. No one would dare say a word. Not unless they wanted to get tossed in a dungeon. Invited to court. Meanwhile, the peasants were out in the fields sweating it out under the sun. Washington cold. Rivers. Changing into their one spare I'm sleeping next to their goats for warmth. They didn't smell. But at least that filth was functional. No one was pretending the hastened. Guy with muddy boots was a model of virtue. He was just trying to make it to next Tuesday, without dying of exposure or crop failure. There's not going to be tomorrow historians about whether the noble class it's actually cared about being clean, or if they just had a different definition of it. Someone, like you, the wealthier folks did value hygiene, just not in the ways we recognized, like the use of scented oils in elaborate grooming rituals. How to say it was all smoke and mirrors, literally. The nobles wrapped themselves in perfume clouds and stiff bend. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. They want it to be clean. They just had no clue how. So imagine yourself in that world, straddling the line between class and cleanliness. You've just helped your neighbor wash her linens by the river. Your hands red from the cold water. You return to the village and pass a noble caravan heading through town. The air shifts. Perfumes mixed with horse, sweat, and old wine. You breathe in and realize something. Underneath all the fancy spices and silks, they think just as much as you do. Maybe worse. That's the dirty secret of medieval life. Status didn't save you from the stink. If anything, shoes, religion, in the Middle Ages wasn't just a Sunday obligation. It was the atmosphere did fill the churches, the bells, the laws, and even the smells. Yes, believe it or not, religion had a scent, and it wasn't always the comforting aroma of incense wafting through a quiet cathedral. It was a mixed bag of burning herbs, moldy stone, rotting relics, and the combined breath of a dozen fasting monks in an unventilated chapel. Heavenly. Not exactly. Let's step inside a medieval church. The first thing you notice isn't the stained glass or the towering arches. Heavy. It smells like damp stone and candle smoke, with a faint undercurrent of old wooden dust. That's probably older than your bloodline. If it's a special holy day, the burning incense, frankincense, something slightly more budget-friendly like dried herb. It fills your lung. Is kosher tong. It's a smell you associate with salvation, but also somehow mildew. That incense wasn't just for vibes, it had a purpose. Medieval. People didn't bathe much, remember, so church services could get, let's say, dozens or even hundreds of unwashed bodies, hacked into a stone room with no windows and no airflow. Something had to be done. Surprise senses, filled with smoking resins through the aisles. Masking the BO with holy smoke. It became symbol, the scent of prayer, rising to heaven. But really, it was divine deodorant in action. And then there was a boy. Every church wanted a piece of the sacred phone. Fragments of locks of hair from martyr. Cloth soaked in holy blood. What is the problem? Some of those relics weren't exactly well preserved. In fact, a lot of them were straight up rotting in their display cases. That miraculous odor some pilgrims reported smelling when they visited a relic shrine. This chance, it was less divine intervention and more the slow decay of a 200-year-old. People lined up to kiss these things. They pressed their lips to glass coffins. Silver relic wreaths. Will splinters of wood supposedly from the true cross. You standing in that line, holding a candle, and trying very hard not to. You're here to receive a blessing, not a bacterial infection. But the air tells a different story. Is musky. Humid. And somehow carries both hope. Add mild. Monasteries were no better. You think places of spiritual reflection would be clean, peaceful sanctuaries. But monasteries were workhouses. Monks spent their days copying manuscripts, brewing ale, farming, feeding the poor, and crucially not bathing. In some orders, cleanliness was considered vanity. Dirt was humility. A bit of crust in your hair, a sign of spiritual discipline. 1 month reportedly wore the same habit. Set alarm for 25 years without washing. You can practically hear the life support. Now imagine the dormitories. Rows of beds, packed into long, narrow rooms. Each one just a straw mattress on a wooden board. No blankets, unless it was winter. No personal space. And absolutely no regular linen washing. The blend of damp. Old books. You crawl into your assigned spot. Try not to inhale too deeply. You're here to get closer to God. But right now, you're closer to the monk beside you, and his breath smells like pickled onions and silent judgment. The kitchen isn't much better. Meals are simple. Cruel stale bread, cabbage stew, but the aroma of overcooked root vegetables clings to the walls like regret. Without modern ventilation, every room in the monastery eventually smells like whatever was served 3 weeks ago. Only allowed on certain feast days. But when it's on the menu, it comes with a full fanfare of medieval butchery. And the kind of funk that gets into your sinuses never leaves. There's also a theological fun. Cleanliness was tied directly to morality. The body was just a temporary synchron sack of meat. Washing it too much was what is IDEF, indulgent. Dangerous. Why cleanse the flesh when it was the spirit that needed purifying. Better to spend your energy praying, fasting, flagellating. Walking barefoot to a shrine halfway across the continent. And that was contradiction. Monks might refuse to but they spend hours scrubbing the altar with fragrant oils. They might live in, but obsess over the ritual cleanliness of their vestments. Some churches burned herbs not just for scent, but purify the air, believing that smoke drive away demons or disease. It was a spiritual February with high. Here's a quirky bit of trivia. Some saints were believed to emit a sweet, unearthly fragrance, even after it was called the odor of sanctity. It meant that body wasn't rotting. Sound like a common sense. It was preserved by divine grace. Pilgrims would travel for miles just to smell a saint's tomb. Whether they were catching a whiff of miracle or just decomposing fabric is anyone's. Modern scholars debate just how pervasive the stench of religion really was. Some argue that the use of incense and ritual cleansing suggests a higher awareness of hygiene. Religious settings. Let me give credit. I'll just say that's a very generous reading of burn some herbs and hope for the best. The truth is probably both. There was some awareness, but not enough to cancel out the full sensory assault of hundreds of fasting monks in wool robes. You were a pilgrim are now kneeling at the altar. A thin mist of what floats in the air. You're surrounded by silence and the scent of melted wax. Behind you, someone sneezes wetly. You try to focus on the divine, but it's hard when your eyes are watering, and you can taste the stone mold on the back of your tongue. Afterward, do you like a candle, drop a coin into the alms box, and file out with the rest of the faithful? You're spiritually uplifted. Physically. Eureka smoke. And a hint of dried fish from the MANSTER. Which is fine, because back in your village, that smell means something. It means you've been somewhere. Holy. Just maybe crack a window on the ride home. Let's talk about houses. Those rest to me slightly scandalous little bubbles of cleanliness. In an otherwise filthy world. At first glance, they seemed like a no-brainer. People need to wash right. A public place with hot water soap and someone willing to scrub your back. That sounds downright civilized for the Middle Ages. What is the twist? Bathhouses weren't just about hygiene. They are also dens of sign. Gossip. On social awkwardness wrapped in steam and naked strangers. Cleanliness may have been next to godliness, but only until the priest walked in and shut the whole thing down. Imagine you're in a medieval town and you hear the word stew. You might think of soup. Wrong. In Middle English. Stew was slang for a bath. I'm stepping into one was an experience. You're immediately hit with a humid breath of boiling water. The scent of rosemary floating in the air, and the overlapping murmur of voices. Everyone's half-dressed, totally naked, sweating through the faux. You can barely see across the room. Somewhere, Someone's pouring wine. In the back, two people are laughing a little. Too intimate. This isn't just a place to rinse your feet. Bathhouses with communal. Men and women bathe together. At least in the early part of the middle ages. No dividrs. No privacy curtains. Just skin soap. And maybe a lute player in the corner to class things up. It was a social event. You didn't drink and bathe. All in one go. Business meetings happened. So did matchmaking. And yes, plenty of other things that made the church nervous. Some bathhouses started offering extra services. Let's call them spiritual. Messages with air quotes. Prostitutes worked in the stews, often openly. You might go in for a back scrub and end up booking an entirely different kind of session. Suddenly, both houses weren't just about washing your body. They were about indulgences. What's please? The mixing of what's gender and morality. All things that made the authorities sweat harder than anyone actually in the bath. For a while, they flourished. Cities like Paris, London, and Prague had dozens of stews operating at once. Both houses advertised with colorful signs. And sometimes even live musicians out front. The interiors range from simple wooden tubs to elaborate tiled rooms with heated floors and running water. If you had coin, you could live like a soap slick emperor for an hour, and the soap itself, made from animal fats and ashes. Often mixed with herbs to disguise the smell. It worked. You wouldn't come out smelling like a field of daisies, but at least you'd be less crusty than you went in. Attendants would scrape dead skin with rough clothes or tools. Massage oil into your SC. Tooth cleaning services. Primitive scrubs made with vinegar. And quirky fact. In some towns, bathhouses had posted rules. No fighting, no gambling, no loud singing, and in one case, no excessive splashing. Which raises questions. How much splashing was considered excessive? Was there a bathhouse splash referee? Probably not. But we'd like to imagine one. Towel around his neck, scowling into the steam. But of course, the dream couldn't last. By the 14th century, the tone started to shift. The Black Death. Suddenly, anything involving public gatherings, naked bodies and water became suspicious. Both houses, what symbols of social life and basic hygiene, were blind for spreading disease. People feared that the hot water opened the skin, letting in corrupted me. Which ironically, Amanda, getting clean was now seen as dangerous. On top of that, the church really ramped up its moral crackdown. Both houses have become in their eyes glorified brothels. Sins of the flesh were bad enough when done in secret. Imagine encouraging them with warm water and candlelight. Sermons began targeting the stew. Laurel panic spread faster than license and monastery. Laws were passed. Closures followed. In London, the stews in Suffolk were officially shut down in 1546 by King Henry VIII. Not because of disease, but because of their unrepentant sinfulness. If the soap didn't wash your soul out, you went. There's a scholarly debate about whether shutting down bathhouse is really helped anything. Some historians argue that it pushed people into filthy habits, cutting off one of the few chances the average person had to actually scrub their body. Others believe it was a necessary public health move, even if the science behind it was wildly inaccurate. Either way, once bathhouses disappeared, personal hygiene took another nosedive. Right into a pile of unwashed laundry, unlicensed bed. You wandering through this period. Might stumble on one of the last you still in operation. It's discreet now. Off hidden behind a curtain in a back hall. Inside, a single tub weight. Steam rising slowly. Candles flickering low. You pay a few coins. Someone hands you a cloth and tells you not to linger. You feeling the heat loosen your joints and the grime of the week slide off your skin. For glorious mom. You remember what it's like to not feel like your skin's made of barn dust and goat oil. But then the duel creaks open. A city official, or maybe A dot someone import dot the bathkeeper goes pale. You get out fast drying off with a towel that smells like old stew. Outside the wind hits you. You're already starting to cool, the warmth fading. You smell like soap and fear. Later you hear the bathhouse was shut down. Unholy activities. Unclean practices. You roll your eyes. You were just trying to rinse the plague off your elbow dot, but whatever dot back to SpongeBob with rainwater and shame. And that's one of the few places where people actually try to not reek, like decay and desperation dot is lost to time. Hygiene once again. Here comes a luxury of the bold in the heretical. Enjoy your dry pits while they last. Philthy. Rich. You've got a castle or retinue of servants. Is a wardrobe that requires scaffolding to wear. And the name long enough to need a footnote. Congratulations. But before you get too smug, just know this. You still smell. Possibly. Even worse than the peasants you wouldn't dare make eye contact with. And because you're rich, you get to participate in one of the more tragically ineffective trends in medieval hygiene: scented accessories. The medieval version of just spray. More cologne was the command. Amandas with little balls made of gold, silver, or carved wood, filled with aromatic substances, herbs, spices, crushed flowers, maybe some ambergris, if you had cash to. They were strung on chains, tucked into belts, or even hidden in the folds of those elaborate robes nobles insisted on wearing in all weather. Think of it like a medieval AirPod case, except instead of holding EARBUDS, it holds your last line of defense against someone else's. You are well-dressed courtier. Might be walking through the crowded halls of a palace, or every third person smells like they've been locked in a meat cellar since spring. You subtly raise your pomander to your nose, pretending to cough when really you're just trying to survive the stench of Duxo and news on Watchtower and garlic bread. The relief is brief. Just a puff of clothing cinnamon. Then it's gone, like a ghost of hygiene. Commanders weren't just fancy nose holders. Play-we, believed to protect you from disease. This is where the science gets delightfully weird. The prevailing theory at the time was the bad smells. Miasma. Caused. Search the air was. Fever, or covering your nose with something pleasant wasn't just for comfort. It was survival. Smell something bad. In your life might be at risk. Smell something good. You just bought yourself a few more weeks of not dying. There was a whole industry of medieval scents. Straight. You had sachets of herbs sewn into clothes, dried flowers stuffed into mattress seams, rosewater sprinkled on linen, and perfumed gloves. Gloves that reach of imported oils, musk and citrus. Some nobles even carried little sponges, soaked in vinegar, and rose oil to press against their faces when the streets got unbearable. You might be choking on sewer steam, but at least your gloves smell like Cecile. And here's the old is perfume didn't make people cleaner. Just make them smell confusing. The funk didn't go away. Just wrestled with lavender until one scent pinned the other. You end up with this bizarre olfactory layering of body odor. Old fab, wood smoke, rotting. And then jasmine. Or clothes. Put violets mashed into animal fat and smeared behind someone's ear. It's less clean. What just died in a flower card. One of the more fascinating and slightly grot. What's clerks of the time was the use of ambergris. Basically whale v. lights that have been aged, hardened, and powdered. It was red, insanely expensive. The price for sweet earthy. You'd find it in everything from commanders to soaps to perfumes meant for royalty. So yes, you might be rich. The part of your refined scent comes courtesy of semen from a sperm whale. Medieval luxury is a weird place. But let's be honest, most people couldn't afford any of this. If you were middle class or below, your scent masking options were limited to maybe a sprig of mint in your hat. Or a dried rosemary sewn into your belt. Occasionally, you might crush some herbs in your hands and rub them on your neck. Instant medieval cologne. Guaranteed to hold up for a solid 20 minutes before your natural musk reasserted dominance. Whole rooms were scented in castles bundles of dried herbs called stewing herbs was scattered across the floors. Every step released a puff of aroma, which helps counteract the not-so-pleasant side effect of having no toilets. On a steady stream of visitors tracking in goat manure. In theory, it created a fragrant environment. In reality, it was more like an herbal distraction from the war crimes your nose was enduring. Now here's where it gets really absurd. During plague out, make doctors all those infamous bird beak masks. Yes, not the ones that look like a goth toucan auditioning for a death metal band. The long nose was stuffed with herbs, spices, and dried flowers. Why? Same logic as the commander. Keep the bad smells out, and maybe you won't get sick. Did it work? Not at all. But it looks fantastic on Instagram if they had it. Which they didn single quotes d. But there's a lively academic debate about just how widespread pomander use was. Some historians argue it was limited to the elite, while others believe the practice trickled down to wealthier merchants and even suburban workers. There's evidence of scent. Balls and herbal sachets found in burial sites across Europe. Maybe they believed even the dead prefer to smell like cinnamon rather than corp. Can't blame them. Fragrant little time traveler. I'm heading to court today. Your finest tunic is brush. Your shoes polished. I'm talking to your sleeve is a silver commander, filled with a mix of rosemary. Add dried rose petals. You pass through the gates into a crowded hall where everyone is shouting, drinking, and fanning themselves against the stifling heat. The smell hits immediately. A musky blend of sweat. Mild. Desperation. To your nose and breathe in. It's not much, but it's something. As you approach your patron, you offer a deep. Commander discreetly lowered. I smell even worse up close, like wine-soaked wool and ancient cheese, but you smile through it. Politics, after all, is about endurance. And in this era, that means surviving someone else's perfume-drenched body odor for as long as necessary. At the end of the day, you're home again, hanging your pouch by the door. You sniff it once more. Just a faint ghost of lavender remains. Tomorrow you'll refill. Maybe try some sage this time, because in a world where nobody really bathes, you take your victories where you can. Clove-scented and holly. By now you've probably figured out that medieval folks had a lot working against them in the smell department. But if there's one thing guaranteed to take already questionable hygiene. And drop kick it straight into the nosebleed section. Not the elegant banquet style medieval feast Hollywood likes to sell you. The roasted swan and sugar sculptures and velvet goblets of wine. We're talking about what the average person, what it did to their body, and what their body intended to everyone else's personal space. Let's start with the basics. You're a regular villager. Your diet consists of whatever you can grow, steel trade, or mostly that means bread. Barley bread. Oat. Bread. If you're lucky, wheat bread. But that's usually reserved for the rich, so you're probably not that lucky. This bread is hard. Dense. A few striped pebbles from the millstone. And I smell that's a mix of sour yeast and slight despair. It fills you up, but your teeth will be begging for mercy by the time you single quotes read. Next on the menu, onions. Easy to grow. And flavorful in that eye-watering, breath-destroying way. Vegetables. When available, are boiled until they resemble soggy fabric. Then tossed into a sort of edible swamp, made from whatever grains and legumes haven't gone moldy. Occasionally, you'll get a piece of dried or salted meat. It smells like old leather and chews. Fresh meat is a rare luxury. When you do get it. It's usually goat or mutton that's been hanging a little too long. So now you're walking around with a gut full of hard bread, boiled cabbage and half fermented cheese. Your body predictably does not appreciate this. Gas is common, extremely common. People walk around farting constantly, and no one even flinches. If someone lifts a leg to one side while having a casual conversation, that's just daily. You just make sure to step up when. To make things worse, most people drink ale. Not because they're all party animals, but because the water might kill them. With no reliable filtration, rivers and wells are often contaminated, so beer. Low alcohol, cheap and boiled during brewing, is the safest option. You drink it from sunup to sundown. It fills your belly, blows your mind, and add a yeasty funk to your breath and sweat that never quite. On feast days, you might get wine if you're noble, but that's usually sour and cut with herbs, honey, or even chalk to stretch it further. It smells exactly how you'd expect. Medieval wine with chalk in it to smell like regret. Now let's talk about digest. You know that feeling when you eat too much dairy and your body sends out a passive-aggressive warning text from your lower intestine? That was basically daily life in the Middle Ages. With diets high in hard-to-digest grains, spoiled fats, and undercooked pulses. Bloating and gastrointestinal distress with the norm. Combine that with very little understanding of nutrition. And everyone was either constipated or dealing with what was poetically called flux. If you had diarrhea, you chalked it up to bad humors or a cursed turnip. Either way, you didn't stop eating the same thing tomorrow. This diet didn't just mess with your internal plumbing. It shaped your. Think about garlic oozing from your pores, breath that smells like pickled turnips and beer, clothes steeped in sweat from a protein-deficient body trying to haul hay all day. Your body odor isn't just human mask. It's fermented peasant stew served hot and fresh. The food situation is different, but not necessarily better. You've got access to more. Well, more sugar, more spices, and somehow even worse, sugar starts entering the European diet during the later Middle Ages. Is a no-go snap it up like medieval toddlers in a cake buffet. The chewing candied fruit sugar, coated almonds. Add pastries, glazed in syrup. Taste amazing. Destroys teeth. Rotten gums. Expose roots, infected molars. Your breath becomes a medieval weapon. And spices. I love spices. Clove, cinnamon, pepper, saffron. Imported an enormous cost from Asia or the Middle East. But these aren't just for flavor. If a covering up the taste of questionable meat, if you've ever smelled me, that's about 4 days past its death certificate, but still technically on the plate. Imagine that with a splash of cinnamon and a prayer. That's noble cuisine. There's an ongoing debate among historians about how much of this was. That's truly unbearable. Balanced. Then we give credit for, especially in rural areas, where access to fresh produce and dairy was better. Others argue the overwhelming reliance on preserved foods. Bad water. Spectacularly funky humans. The answer probably depends on location. Class and how desperate you were during the last harvest. Here's a quirky historical. During courtship, people might give each other play freshman gifts. Little cones of sugar with mint or small fruit chews laced with Alice. Nothing says romance like, hey, I like you, but your mouth smells like cabbage left in the sun. You and this fragrant era finish your daily meal. Cottage and barley bread with garlic chaser. Then wipe your mouth with the back of your sleeve and belch like a satisfied beast. No one looks up. It's expected. Take a swig and consider the lingering note of unwashed mug mixed with whatever animal lived in it last week. Village. Square. The smell of bodies mingles with whatever the wind blew in from the tannery in the pig pens. You breathe it in like it's air, because it is. This is your ecosystem. Now, everything you eat becomes part of you, and your scent joins the chorus of smells that define your home, your people, your age. You don't notice it anymore. Not really. Buena Vista. A traveler from another land or another time would step into this moment. Inhale once and promptly pass out. You just yawn and wonder if there's any garlic left for tomorrow. Let's have a quiet moment now for something that rarely got one in the Middle Ages. Laundry. Washing clothes in this area wasn't a weekly chore or relaxing Saturday. Ritual. It was a physical punishing ordeal that people avoided as long as human. Dignity or marriage prospects allowed. Your shirt. You wore it until it begged for. Your undergarment. Well, assuming you owned more than one pair, you might rotate them between. Washings that occurred somewhere between the full moons and divine intervention. Imagine your daily. It's made of wool or linen, not exactly breathable. By midday, is soaked in sweat. By night. It's taken on the center of fire, smoke. Onions. Animal. And whatever your neighbor dumped in the street that morning. It's still your best tunic. You sleep in, you working it. You might even be buried in it, depending on how things go. Washing this garment is not as simple as tossing it in a machine. Is catching up on your reading. Medieval. Laundry involves dragging your recent clothes to the nearest water source, usually a river, maybe a communal well. You scrub it with actual lye. Play a harsh and caustic solution that might dissolve stains or your fingers or both. Can you beat the fabric against rocks or heavy wooden paddles, trying to convince the dirt and sweat to let go? It often doesn't. If you're lucky, the sun to dry your clothes. If you're really lucky, no birds drop anything on them while they. But more often, drawing is done indoors, draped over smoky rafters or laid near the hearth, back in with a hint of wood. So yes, clean clothes were technically cleaner. They also smelled like someone barbecued a goat in them. Did we mention shrinkage? Fabric back then wasn't press shrunk or treated, warped in unpredictable ways. Wash it once. And suddenly you're perfectly fitted. Tunic now clings like a sausage casing or droops like a wizard's robe. Buttons pop. Off seams pulled on. So a lot of people just didn't bother. Play brush off visible dirt. Maybe beat the dust out with a stick. And carry on like nothing happened. Undergarments were in theory the most frequently washed items. Usually linen shifts. Or chemists worn close to the skin to absorb sweat and body oil. These were thin, white, and fragile, so people did try to clean them more of. But more often still meant once a month give, or take a festival. And that's if you owned more than one. How many peasants were there shift every day? It only removed it when it became so stiff it could walk to the river by itself. Now for welfare households. Laundry was D. You didn't wash your own linen. You had a long dress for that. But don't picture some dainty servant girl with a lazy bonnet humming while she rinses your collars. Skin chapping labor. Laundry system. Icy rivers up to their knees. Scrubbing and wringing and holding. Baskets of wet fabric that weighed more than most toddlers. The hands were raw, their backs permanently bent. And I got paid in crumbs and blisters. In towns, they were public. Wash houses or levoirs were women gathered to do laundry communally. You just sing and gossip the rhythmic slap of cloth against stone. And occasionally full-blown arguments. Laundry wasn't just work, it was social. The river water wasn't exactly clean. And in some places doing laundry upstream from a tannery was a death sent. Since your fab. And possibly your health. And if your clothes couldn't be washed, you perfumed them. You stuffed the sleeves with dried lavender or mint. Sprinkled rose water on the collar. We'll smoke them over a fire with burning herbs. You just distracted the nose for 5 to 7 seconds. Some people even layered extra garments on top of their filthiest pieces. So the visible lay looked clean. Is the medieval version of wearing a blazer to hide the fact that you haven't done laundry since Lent. Quirky detail time. Some people actually owned scented shirts. These were undergarments dyed with herbs and oils, intended to emit a faint fragrance as the body heated up. The idea was that as you sweat, which you absolutely would, the smell would be masked by the pleasant aroma of sage or vio. Great theory. In practice, you just ended up smelling like sweaty. If you've ever gotten in. August thought, it's not an improvement. There's a scholarly debate about how widespread laundry really was among different classes. Some argue that even the poorest folks try to keep their undergarments as clean as possible because they believed cleanliness could prevent disease. How say the rarity of linen? Ownership and the sheer difficulty of laundering meant most people were walking around in dirty clothes most of the time. Regardless of intention, the records Apache the smells. Not so much. You today are facing laundry day. It's been 3 weeks since your last wash, and your shift now has its own opinion on. You drank your comments to the river, scrubbing them until your knuckles bleed. Then wring them out until your arms shake. By the time you're done, clothing lost circulation in your hands. I'm called a cold from standing in freezing water for hours. Later, and watch smoke curl through its fibers. You feel a moment of pride. It's not exactly clean. It still has a faint crust of mystery around the hem. But it's cleaner than yesterday. In medieval times is as good as new. Tomorrow, you'll put it back on. Where are the layers of wool and leather? And pretend you don't smell like smoke onions and mold. Because no one else is doing better. And if someone is, let's slide into the perfumed hallways of the medieval elite now. Who is magnificent? Maniacs who tried to outdo each other. Not just with golden titles, but with how effectively floral they could make themselves smell. You've heard of arms races, right? Welcome to the perfume wars where lords and ladies wedge scent base. Psychological warfare at court. And the stakes were your reputation, your nose, and depending on what exotic oil you used, your liver. Perfume in the Middle Ages wasn't just about masking. Prestige. A statement. If you smell like sandalwood or musk. It meant you had the money and global trade connections to pull that off. Is what local aromas. These are imported luxuries, extracted from plants that grew on the other side of the known world. Well secreted from glands of animals you wouldn't want to meet in a dark forest. Smell like a rose garden in December. I told everyone you were rich enough. What's the fake nature itself? And yes, perfume was political. It wasn't just one on the body. It was worn into the room. The goal was to arrive with such a strong olfactory presence that people knew you were coming. 5 seconds. Will you enter? If you scent lingered after you left, even better. That was social dominance. People literally measured your influence in nose mileage. But the perfume itself wasn't. It was brutal. Think spiced wine, crushed flowers, honey, soaked resins. That's secretions from a cat's backside, by the way. And amber. We're back to whale vomit again. Yes. Mixed it all together in some animal fat or alcohol. And you've got the medieval version of older status. Anxiety. The result. You smell like an erotic 4. There was no gentle spurts to the play. Stored tasteful touch behind the ear. No. They soaked their gloves, rubbed perfume into the hair, saturated their undergarments, even added scented wax to their mustaches. The particularly extra. Entire rooms could be perfumed. Tapestries was sprayed. Floors strewn with rose petals. Servants walked through with smoking censers, filled with fragrant woods before a noble entered like a nasal red car. When perfumes collided, it wasn't always pleasant. Are the banquet or court function? You might have 30 people, all rocking different scent profiles. One guy's got strong notes. Do frankincense and animal musk. Another lady smells like rose water and cloves. Someone in the corner is clearly fermenting their own arm. It's under a layer of cinnamon. The scent. Clouds so chaotic. Make it could be classified as a war crime in modern olfactory terms. The records of nobles fainting from the strength of competing odors. And honestly, that track. Imagine trying to deliver a diplomatic address while your nostrils are being punched repeatedly. By 11 o'clock. You're in trifecta. Coming off a visiting duke from Bavar. You wouldn't make it through the opening lines without weeping. Now perfumes weren't only used for flattering flair. They had battlefield applications to metaphorical battlefields, that is, a clever noble might flood a rival's chamber with a center associated with illness or impurity. What's perfume is passive-aggressive sabotage. There's even a recorded case where a noble woman allegedly poisoned her enemy's perfumed gloves. Were the true, or what was the medieval equivalent of hiding fish in the quirky, one particularly intense trend involved perfume-infused jewelry, rings. Lockets and brooches could be filled with scented substances. They were called vang aigretts. Can you sniff them in public to guard against me? Asthmas. Went well truthfully against the breath of whoever was speaking too closely to your face. It was also a way to look. Mysterious and nothing says, I'm above this peasant. Like taking a whiff of your ruby-encrusted stink ball. Mid-conversation. Now, will these perfumes effective? Depends on your definition. Did they mask odors? Temporarily. Do they replace body stench with a more socially acceptable one? Yes. Do they ever make the wear actually clean? Not even a little. People still skip bathing. Still will the same crusty linens for weeks. Still exhale through teeth held together by prayer and sugar. Perfume just helped everyone pretend otherwise. There's an open debate among historians about how accessible perfumes were to the lower classes. Some suggest that herbal perfumes, like rosemary, were coming enough that even a modest household might have a little stash for special occasions. Others argue that any scent strong enough to compete with unwashed feet on a week of hole stables would have been priced far out of reach for common. The consensus, if you could afford perfume, you used it a lot. If you couldn't, you hoped a person next to you had some and would share the aroma. You today are preparing to attend a royal feast. You've already coated your gloves in rosewater and soak your sleeves in a custom blend of violet and cardamom. You considered amber green but decided against it. Marine. As you approach the great hall, you see others arriving in sync. Clouds of their own, like walking incense burners. The air is thick before you even step through the doors. Inside, the atmosphere is pure decadence. Roasted meats on platters. Wine flowing like a small river, and the overlapping scent of 20 different nobles, who all decided this. This was the night to wear everything in their perfumery box. Dizzying. You find your seat. Already light dash-headed. And glance at your neighbor. A lady whose neckline is soaked in jasmine, so strong it could cause hallucinations. She smiles. You nod politely while discreetly covering your nose with your scented sleeve. Halfway through the feast, someone spills wine. Another person lets out a silent but deadly reminder. The cottage is not digestion, friend. And the court jester accidentally ignites a scented candle, too, close to someone's beard oil. The whole smells like singed rosemary, fermented onion. I'm panic. But still, this is elegance. This is refinement. The most well-dressed, well-performed disaster in history. Later. Did you leave? No, still twitching. You realize the perfume didn't help as much as you'd hop. Your hair smells like roasted duck and muss. Your clothes like sweat and lily. And your dignity, mildly bruised by the realization that even royalty can't escape the stink. Hey, you looked amazing. And in the medieval world, that's half the battle. Enough tiptoeing around the edges. Let's walk straight into the heart of medieval urban horror. The open-air markets, butcher stools, tanneries, and fish vendors. Also known as the death-smelling engine rooms of the medieval city. If the streets were bad in the bath, houses were questionable. The markets were their loud, wet, squelching cousins that smelled like they wanted you dead. There are stink levels. And then there is and R. What is symphony that could make a strong stomach. First picture of the marketplace. It's early morning, but don't imagine dewy produce carts and cheerful grandmas offering fresh basil. Instead, you've got butchers hacking through half-frozen goat carcasses, tools for self-defense, blood pools beneath the tables mixing with yesterday's grease, and whatever fell through the cracks last week. There's no ice no refrigeration no waste bins. Bones, guts and ore, lens pilot like the world's grossest sculpture. Stray dogs patrol the area so the pig sometimes at single quotes as hard to tell who's doing the better job. Cleaning up. Fishmongers aren't helping either. The stools aligned with slippery silver corpses, laid out on wooden boards, already warped from years of soaking in brine and decay. Play catfish right there. Flinging in trails. Into barrels all, let's be real. Onto the street seagulls. Dive bomb from above like flying pickpockets. Stealing scraps and, occasionally, dropping unwanted bits on passers-by. You walk too close. You got splashed with fish water that smells like it's already been through someone's digestive tract. Congratulations, you're baptized in haddock juice. Now, depending on your masochism, let's head over to the tannery district. Now, if you've never had the pleasure, 10 reasons why animal hides go to be turned into leather. This involves soaking them in a series of chemical death baths, starting with lime to strip hair. Then fermented urine to soften the skin, and finally dog down. Process the text. And yes, that's real dog feces. Collected in baskets and prized for alleged enzyme take properties. This is a place where hide soaking fill. Why do people work in it? You stand near the edge of the tannery lane. The smell hits like a physical object. Ammon. Hot. Even when the air is cold. It punches your sinuses and leaves you blinking back tears. Workers slosh around in ankle deep pits of blackish sludge. Sleeves rolled up. Faces blank from years of factory. The clothes are permanently dyed in shades of brown and gray. They probably can't smell anything anymore. And honestly, that's a gift from whatever medieval god Betty's leatherworkers. 10 is weren't just smelly. They were segregated. These businesses were usually kept far from city centers, pushed to the outskirts, where the river could carry the waste downstream. Straight into someone else's drinking water. Even medieval people. Who were famously tolerant of their own stink. Agreed that tanneries were too. Some cities even made laws restricting how close itinerary could operate to churches. Market. Or anything involving human dignity. Quirky fact of the day. Sometimes in England were paid a small bonus if they could. You could collect and transport their own supply of dog. This was known as pure. Hilariously. And they named. So yes. Workers would walk around asking neighbors for their pets' poop. Then hold it in sacks to work like they were delivering fresh bread. Welcome to the Middle Ages. When nothing smells like it sounds. Now, let's go back to the market. Okay, because we haven't even hit the dairy stores. You think cheese smells bad now. Try it without refrigeration. Medieval cheese ranged from mildly nutty to full-blown chemical warfare. Soft cheeses were sold wrapped in what's the good barely contained the news. Some vendors added herbs to mask the ripeness, which is a poetic way of saying cover up the fact. What's the best cheese may have become sentient. Add milk. There was no in-between. Add to that carts full of vegetables that have seen better weeks. Wilted greens bruised, root crops, onions sprouting fuzzy growth. There's no standard for what can or can't be sold. If it isn't physically crawling away on its own, it's fair game. I'm behind the produce. Stand someone's probably boiling trip. Overheating yesterday's meat pies. I'm missing a greasy, metallic odor. Settles like fog over the entire square. But, you know what. It's not all gag worth. These markets were the heart of community life. I'm at the. Is laughter. Gossip deals being struck. You'd hear shouts of 2 for a penny next to someone haggling in 4 different languages, comforting in their own revolting way. Like the old, factory version of your annoying cousin. You wouldn't choose to be near them. play that part of your ecosystem now. There's a scholarly debate about just how much medieval people noticed these market smells. Some argue they were nose blind, so accustomed to the aromas of life that they didn't even register them as offensive. Others point to complaints from travelers, city laws banning certain types of vendors, medical tracts full of advice about avoiding bad air. Clearly some people car, but most probably just shrugged and kept shopping. You wandering through this delightful circus of bodily fluids and culinary anarchy. Dodge or splash from the butcher's pail and sidestep a pig rooting through cabbage leaves. You post to buy some dried apples from a woman whose apron could stand up on its own. Her breath smells like cider and 10 years of hard winters. She smiles. And you're not loud.m, ESSI.N, unapologetically rip. And as you chew on your leathery apple slices and try not to inhale too deeply, you realize something. Roll the. This is where things happen. It's disgusting, yes, but it's alive. A pulsing, pungent artery of medieval life. One that you, against your better judgment of starting to love. Medieval beauty. And if your mind just conjured up images of flowing gowns, delicate curls, and radiant complexions straight out of a pre-Raphaelite, let's yank that velvet curtain down real fast. Because underneath the lace and ribbons was a harsh powder lead based reality. Welcome to the medieval makeup routine. We're looking flawless meant slowly poisoning yourself. I'm smelling good required rubbing your face with animal. Glamour has never been this gruesome. You wake up in your noble chamber, sunlight filtered through dusty, stained glass. You have flattened from last night's sweat, and possibly the weight of a rat who mistook your head for a pillow. You're expected to look your best today. Maybe you're meeting someone important. We'll try not to look like you've just survived a week-long dungeon. Stay. By the way, time to begin your routine. Step 1. Cleanse the skin. And by cleanse, we mean maybe splash a bit of rose water or vinegar on your face, if you're lucky enough to have it. Too harsh for the sensitive skin of noble lad. So you use a rag soaked in floral infusions or a paste made from ground-up almonds. And honey. It's sticky. It attracts flies. But it smells better than the rest of you, so you go with it. Next to fiesta resistance. The complexion. Pale skin was the gold standard of beauty. Why? Because it meant you didn't work in the sun like those unfortunate peasants. It meant you were delicate, refined, probably dying of some fashionable indoor illness. To get the look women apply to face paint made from. You guessed it. Lead white. Is chalky substance to make the face appear ghostly and smooth. While slowly destroying the skin underneath. Over time it calls sores. Flaking. Would single quotes s the actual. For a pop of color, you apply rouge, usually made from red ochre cinnabar. Mercury sulfide, because why not add more poison. Will crush beetles. Lips and cheeks got the treatment. They're not too much. Subtlety was. If your skin looked too lively, you risk appearing healthy, which was deeply unfashionable in high society. Hey, there was another battlefield. Blonde was prized. So, if you weren't born with golden locks, you bleach your hair using mixtures of lye and vinegar. Then bite yourself in the sun. Until your scalp begged for mercy. Wigs exist, but they were less about glam. Hair loss from all the bleaching and disease. Real hair was curled with hot iron, sometimes wrapped around sticks and slept on. So you'd wake up looking like a medieval poodle. Smell was a major issue here. You're wearing layers of perfume. Yes, but you're also kicked in animal-based creams and powders. Many cosmetics use bear fat or goose grease as a base. That means your foundation is essentially meat lotion. Add in the heat of the day. Your inability to sweat properly under all those layers and the general lack of bathing. And your face becomes a slow-cooking stew of poison powder and poultry. And don't forget the eyebrows. Thin was in. You are to pluck them into oblivion or shave them off entirely, sometimes painting them back on with Sutter. The same went for your hairline. Women actually pluck the front of their scalp to make their foreheads look higher. The ideal face was oval, elongated, and hauntingly unnatural. If it made you look like a well-dressed alien from a dying star system, you nailed it. Here's your quirky fact. Some beauty recipes called for powdered pearls or crushed precious stones, not because they had any proven effect, just because they were expensive. Imagine grinding up sapphires. Next, just to show off. Medieval flexing was subtle. Sparkly. Like spending your rent money on a glitter. Now, all of this sounds firmly rooted in the noble class. There were versions of it happening further down the social ladder. Peasant women, lacking access to exotic powders, might cheeks with beet juice or rub clay on their faces for a bit of color. So they went by feel and reputation. If someone told you your face looked fresh, you kept doing whatever it was, even if it involves gustong or powder. For the grooming rituals were more subtle, but no less intense. Nobles oiled the bids. Turned the mustaches, and occasionally painted their lips or darkened their lashes. Yes, what's eyeliner? Existed. And some men, especially among certain, what's the prized androgynous beauty, looking sharp, literally sharp as in angular and pale. What color was for peasants, and is a hot little scholarly debate over just how widespread cosmetic use really was. Some argue that medieval beauty practices were mostly restricted to elite court circles. In what seemed beyond the castle gates. Others suggest that beauty culture filtered down in small ways, through herbal remedies. Folk tales. And local traditions of grooming that don't survive well in written records. The truth is probably a blend of elite beauty trends setting the tone, with everyone else doing their best approximation with what they could. And now let's bring you back into this itchy, powdery world. You've just finished applying your cosmet. Your cheeks are delicately flushed. Your forehead is generously enlarged. Your face is now home to nothing to classify you as a minor hazard zone. You sit at your dressing table, dabbing rose water on your admiring your reflection in a polished metal mirror that distorts your face, just enough to make it look almost reg. You head to the hole for the evening's entertainment. Gliding down and winding down stone steps in a gown that hasn't been washed in 2 seasons. As the torchlight hits your face, enclosed frankly white, the scent of your perfumed gloves clashing with the faint hang of bird fat warming on your cheek. Nearby noble nobs at you. Impressed. You smile. Lipstick with cinnabar and try not to move too much. Because if you sweat, your entire face might melt off in streaks of toxic elegance. Tonight, let's feast and fan yourself with practice ease. Tomorrow you'll wake up with a rash, a headache. And half an eyebrow missing. But for now. You are the picture of medieval beauty. Deadly, delicate, and just a little bit fragrant. All right, time to dive into one of the more bizarre paranoia-drenched chapters of medieval hygiene. The widespread belief that water was not just suspicious, it was flat-out dangerous. You're living in a time where the idea of standing under falling water for 10 minutes every day would have been met with the same reaction. Suggesting people lick frogs. Thanks for fun. Low, depending on the region. Licking weird things for health was on the table. But we'll get to that another time. Seawater wasn't just the stuff you drank or dumped out of chamber pots. It was a known wild card. Are the giver of life, and in the minds of many medieval folks, a potential vector of death. And that made bathing in it, especially hot water. Something you did with caution. Superstition. And maybe a prayer to send fee. The root of the fear lay in a mishmash of pseudoscience, tradition, and observation. The idea of the 4 humors. Phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Was the guiding light of medieval medicine. Balance was everything. Disrupt the harmony. and your body went haywire. Open your pores with hot water. Sud. Floating around could seep in and poison your insides. Water didn't cleanse. Imagine being told that washing your skin too thoroughly could weaken your natural defenses. By stripping away the layer of sweat, oils, and grime, you are removing a protective film your body needed. Medieval logic. Dirt is a shield. Nature's hazmat suit. Removing it was like opening your front door to plague. Wearing nothing but a smile and optimism. And so for many, full body baths were reserved for special occasions. For marriage, before major religious holidays, or during illness. Ironically, even then you aren't doing it for hygiene. Ritual. You soaked in hot water, mixed with herbs and oils. Sat in a tub until your skin turned prune-colored. I hope that the rosemary floating on top would protect you from the unseeable evils hovering just outside the room. It didn't help the public baths, those stews we mentioned earlier. Go to reputation for spreading disease. Especially during plague, when people died in droves and nobody understood why. Fingers pointed at a hot room full of naked, sweaty strangers sharing the same tub water. That looked guilty, even if it wasn't. The bathhouse gave my cousin the better to stay dirty and alive than clean and dead. Quirky side. While public bath houses were falling out of favor, sweat bathing was still going strong in some areas. Think of it like a medieval sauna. What rooms filled with steam. Followed by cold rinse or a dry rub with a towel. These were especially common in places like Scandinavia and Eastern Europe. While people did value heat and cleanliness. In ways that seemed downright futuristic to their Western neighbors. What elsewhere? A full bath was starting to look like a last resort for a sinful indulgence. In fact, the church occasionally took a hard line against most excessive bathing. There was concern it promoted vanity. Encouraged distracted from more important things, like pain. Fasting. While debating whether cats was secretly in league with the devil. Monks were sometimes forbidden from bathing more than a few times a year, and even those times were supposed to be less about set and more about humility. Scrap your soul, not your armpit. The contradiction remained. Some medical text of the time did recommend bathing, particularly for the sick or wounded. Doctors would prescribe warm baths, infused with herbs, thyme or lavender. To treat ailments ranging from stomach, thanks to melancholy. They also suggested bloodletting and boiled owl eggs for similar problems. If done right with the proper safeguards and not too, you could destabilize the body, over-relax the muscles, and let all sorts of invisible demons hitch a ride through your pore. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about just how widespread this water phobia was. Fear of bathing was mostly limited to the late medieval period. How do you open? While others point to consistent records suggesting a much broader cultural discomfort. Archaeological evidence of private bathing facilities in wealthier homes seems to contradict the notion. The people were universally afraid of bathing. The contacts. Having a tub didn't mean you used it regularly. Could have just been for show or for emergencies, like playboils and marriage proposals. You, of course. I'm just trying to survive the week without drawing too much attention to your body odor. You haven't bathed in a month. Your shirt is absorbing the damage you consider sneaking down to the river at night for. But a local priest warned about the water spirits that live there. Also last time, someone tried that. They caught something that made their skin peel off like old paint. You decide against. Instead, you eat a small pot of water over the fire and dab yourself with a rag. Face armpit, nothing below the waist. That would be madness. You dust yourself with a mix of crushed rose petals and charcoal. Then slip into your clothes before the chill can set in. You don't feel clean, but you feel rich, really acceptable, which in this era is closed. Later of the feast, you overheard someone bragging that they bathed twice this year. A collective gasp follows. One woman found herself drammed. Another clutches up Amanda like it's a holy relic. In this climate. Next song. Whispers. And that's the punchline of medieval hygiene. It wasn't that people didn't want to be clean. Is that being clean was seen as risky. Something you did carefully. Sparingly. With just enough soap to avoid divine judgment, but not enough to tempt fate. You sit and scratch your arm beneath your tunic. Maybe one day, someone will invent a magical pip that brings clean water to every house. Until then, you'll settle for warm vinegar and denial. Let's take a stroll down to your friendly neighborhood barber. No, not the cheerful fellow with clippers and beard oil. This is the medieval barber surgeon, a man who can trim your bangs, lance a boil and amputate your leg, play all before lunch. The handles, everything. Bloodletting, absolutely. Need a hot shave with a side of leeches. He's your. Just don't expect. Make it to smell like eucalyptus and neck oil in here. The scent that hits you when you step inside is a mix of burnt hair, copley blood, and old cheese. Welcome to Hygiene, the multitask edition. The barbershop is part salon, part operating theater, part confessional booth. It's a narrow room, probably in a back alley or squeezed between a butcher and a... Because zoning laws are still just a twinkle and some bureaucrats. I doubt the wolves are staying. The floor is sticky, and there's always at least one mysterious stain that no one wants to identify. Tools hang from hooks. Razors, scissors, pizzas, hooks, and bone saw. That look like they've seen several small wars. You take a seat, possibly on the same stool someone had a molar yanked out of earlier. Be as heavy with iron and something vaguely medicinal. Play crushed herbs, soaking in vinegar. If it's a clean shop, the barber might heat his razors in a flame before each use. Not for sterilization, mind you, but to make sure the blade glides smooth. Of course. If the blade is too hot, you'll leave with a matching souvenir. 1, 2 inch wide scored on your neck. Today you're just in for a shave and a quick bleed. Yes, bloodletting. The gold standard of medieval health practices. Feeling sluggish. 2 hot. Head ass. Melancholy. Bad dream. That's an easy fix. Drain some blood until you feel faint. Then go home. I need to call turnip. Doctors and barbers alike believe that your body's humans needed balancing, and too much blood meant chaos. Usually at the elbow or ankle, and the red stuff flows into a bowl while your barber hums a little tune and possibly discusses weather patterns. Sometimes they use leeches, live ones. If you're squeamish, tough. They attach them to your skin, let them swell with your blood, then pop them off and store them in a play future. The barber claims it's therapy. You just try not to think about the little worm now full of your essence wriggling in a clay pot by the window. Scissors, razor SCR. And the barber might even apply a nice thick sludge of lard and rosemary to tame the wild frizz. Licensed fleas are everywhere, and barb is often discover the mid-trim. The standard procedure: flick them, sometimes into the fire, sometimes onto the floor. Not that problem anymore. Or the real horror begins. When someone walks in holding their side and wincing. It's time for a minor surgery. Maybe an infected abscess. Or dislocated jaw. Or an embedded arrowhead from a Barbara gone spicy. Tools. Rolls up his sleeves and gets to work. There's no anesthesia, just a good grip. Strong stomach. Can someone nearby to hold a patient down and maybe offer a stick to bite? The screaming is normal. The let single quotes S just say burning flesh and pass is not a scent you ever get used to. Quirky detail for you. The iconic red and white barber pole comes from this exact. The red symbolizes blood, the white symbolizes bandages, and the pole itself represents the staff patients, gripped during bloodletting to keep from flailing. It's a literal monument to historical multitasking. Will fix your hair and your humors, and they were oddly respected, these barber. Surgeons. They weren't quite doctors. You are too lofty to touch actual wounds. Do they have the hands-on experience to get things done? Some even served on battlefields. Is patching up soldiers between sword swings. Will travel with nobles as part of their household. Staff. Did they always know what they were doing? Debatable. Put in a world where medicine involved astrology, charts and prayers. The guy who could pull a tooth without dropping it in your lap. Take me a wizard. There's an ongoing scholarly debate over how much medical knowledge these barbers truly had. Some argue that they were practical geniuses. Young Song, heroes of pre-modern medicine. While others think they were just glorified butchers with a flair for multitasking and a steady hand. The truth, probably somewhere in the middle. Summer compet. Someone terrifying. Brave. Customer. Finish your bloodletting and shave with a towel pressed to your elbow. Your face stinging from the razor. And your brain a little floaty from blood. Loss. The barber offers you a whiff of something sharp. Vinegar soaked with mint, probably. To keep you from passing out on the way out the door. You drop a coin on the counter and step back into the street. Slightly lighter and questionably healthier. Later, you admire your reflection in a puddle. The shaves clean. Your head doesn't hurt anymore. You can finally wear your hat without it sticking to your skull. You survived another visit to the medieval multi-tool with scissors. Your reward. Full body, I think, buzzing in your ears, and the knowledge that your next trip might involve a tooth that's been wiggling for weeks. You make a mental note to avoid crunchy bread and think about your choices. But for now, you smell like vinegar smoke. And hot. It's not pleasant. But at least, it's not fish guts and foot. In the great medieval stink scale, you're currently breaking even. Now we descend into dark. True acrid panic-soaked darkness, because nothing in medieval library landscape quite like the Black Death. One day, you're worried about someone sneezing your footage, and the next, your entire village is reduced to silence, save the sound of distant church bell. For people, you haven't even realized are dead. Forget the bodies for a second. Forget the death counts and the play. Music flatulence and the questionable. Doctors in Leatherby. Let's talk about what the Black Death smelled like. It was put. You walk into a plague-struck town, and it's as if the earth itself is rotting. The air. Make humid. Even if it's winter, you can't tell where the smell begins or ends, because it seems to cling to your skin, crawl into your hair, settle under your fingernail. A blend of sweat, decay, mildew, blood. Vomit. And something you can't quite. Something sour and metallic and ancient. That's the scent of a civilization. Cracking. The plague didn't just kill bodies. Get overwhelmed every system meant to handle them. Cemeteries filled. Gravediggers either died or ran. Whole families were wiped out in days. And their homes were simply boarded up, left to fester inside the airtime. Sometimes you'd smell a plague house before you even saw it. Just a slow. Sweet stench leaking through the wood like. And then there was a mass graves. Hit off the pit dog on the edge of town, filled with bodies. Heaped like logs, covered in lime, then dirt, then more bodies. The scent of death was so strong it overpowered even the spices and vinegar. So, claws people stuffed into their noses. Some try to light fires or carry sweet-smelling herbs in their hands. Held oranges pierced with cloves up to their faces, but nothing could block it. The stench of decay was an equal opportunity invader. You didn't care if you were noble or beggar. I found your nose and nested there. Of course, the smell of the disease itself was no better. The infected bubba. Those painful swollen lumps under the arms and around the groin. Leaking Boston blood. The breadth of plague victims carried a sickly sweet OD. The one chronicler compared to rotting apples, mixed with something boiled in bile. Skin blacken. Gangrene set in. FIFAs, 'cause hallucinations and patients would swept through sheets in hours. Every fluid the human body could produce came out, and all of it reached like the end of the world. People believe that this bad air or miasma was the cause of the disease. Anonymously. With no knowledge of bacteria or fleas. You can't blame them. Play. Surapat. File are equals. So they let in scents. Hung herbs in windows. Slaughtered animals whose breath was considered unlucky. I burnt barrels of pitch in the streets to purify the atmosphere. Did any of it help? Not with the plague. Will the attempt to control the smell? Relentless. A quirky fact from the depth of plague panic. Some doctors recommended bathing in your own urine to prevent infection. Others suggested inhaling the flatulence of healthy people. One text even recommended keeping a goat in your home because the smell of it's done. Draw. What single quotes? S. The corrupted. Vapors. Fighting smell with worse smell was a legitimate medical strategy. Devil problems called for medieval solutions. And of course the infamous plague doctors. The long, dark robes, wide-brimmed hats, and terrifying beaked mask. But just for show. Those beaks were stuffed with herbs, dried flowers, vinegar, soaked sponges, anything to filter the miasma. To modernize, they look like death itself walking. But in that time, Play believed that if they couldn't smell the disease, they might not catch it. Spoiler that log.make failed miserably. Put points for creativity. There's a hot debate among scholars about how the smell of plague influenced medieval responses. Some argue that the overwhelming sensory trauma of the Black Death reshaped public health forever, leading to early quarantine laws, clean the city planning, and even the concept of air purification. Others believe the emphasis on smell and air was a distraction, pulling attention away from more effective practices. Like isolating the sick and, say, killing rats. Either way, the obsession with stench is undeniable. Now picture yourself walking through one of these towns. You have a bundle of dried hare. What's presto face? Lavender. What time? Your eyes water from the smoke of a nearby tire. What clothes and bedding of the dead are being burned? You step around something in the street. You hope it's just garbage. A man stumbles. Past you mutter, with dried blood at the corners of his mouth. He smells like warm. Book on rancid. You try not to breathe in. It doesn't work. You reach the edge of town where the fields used to smell of wet hay and morning dew. Now they're full of temporary graves. The earth has been turned so often that it no longer holds the scent of soil. It just reeks of road. You pause overwhelmed. Your stomach rolls. You're not sick. Not yet. But you feel something inside you. Realization. This is what death smells like. Not dramatic, not poetic, just sticked and all-consuming. At night, the scent still clings to you. Your clothes car. Your hands car. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling of your cottage, wondering if the itch in your throat is the beginning of the end. Somewhere in the village of bell tolls again. Another neighbor gone. You press your bundle to your face and try to sleep. And in the morning. It will all still be that. The disease. The smell. Especially the smell. Let's head inside a medieval castle now. You know, the turret scraping the sky. Thick stone wall. Spanish. Flapping in the breeze and a great hall filled with feasting. Nobles and brooding portraits. Very. Madge. Very. But the truth. Living in a castle in the Middle Ages came with its own kind of horror. Particularly if you had the misfortune of being born with a functioning nose. Because if the peasantry had mud and man, our castles had their own unique brand of a RISTOC. Arctic funk centered around one delightful architectural innovation. The Guard. A college road sounds fancy, right? Like a ward. Place where fine silks are stored. Maybe next to some crushed rose petals and a polished mirror. Except. Picard. Road is the castle. Open more accurately, a glorified hole in the wall. Sometimes enclosed, sometimes not. The emptied straight into the moat below. It was a seat perched over a shaft, usually with a wooden bench, sometimes lined with stone, often positioned right off a hallway, or tucked inside a small side chamber, with a window for airflow. There was no privacy, no plumbing, no dignity, and imagine a latrine that hasn't been cleaned in at the warm list of composting excrement swirling gently on the wind. Stir it up by passing servants and bouncing off the stone walls like a pinball of regret. That's your castle bathroom experience. Some castles had multiple guard ropes, built vertically, so waste from each level dropped into a single chute, or this created what you might call the medieval equivalent of a sewer system. Except there were no pipes, no flushing, and no end in sight. Sometimes the pit was just an open TR. Sometimes it emptied directly into the mode. Yes, the very same note that was supposed to deter enemies, and which often doubled as a lovely open SS pool. Complete with floating refuse and the occasional bloated fish you probably wished it had lived in a better century. Now he has a truly special detail. People sometimes use moats for fishing. And even drew water from them in a pen. That's right. Need to wash your hands. Better hope you're upstream from Saratoga's morning. Constitutional. Of course, nobles weren't crawling down guard rope shafts to clean them. That job fell to the night soilmen, servants tasked with removing accumulated waste, or occasionally stirring the pit to make room. These workers were either deeply underpaid or possibly paid in blessings and TR. Some castle records show special trench digging events. Are the castle's waste pits fully emptied into nearby woods or rivers. Usually once the smell became unbearable, which was apparently a subjective line that took a terrifyingly long time to cross, and even if you avoided the guardrail together, you weren't. Castles with huge drafty and packed with people, cooks, gods, musicians, nobles, visiting dignitaries, jesters. Assorted hangers-on, all of whom were eating, sweating, sleeping, and doing very human things in close quarters. The great holes may have, but grand. With that roaring fires and massive tapestries. But you are still sitting in a room where the stone walls trapped heat, smoke, and body odor. Like a Dutch oven of nobility. Please added their own special layer. Roasting meat, spilled wine, unwashed hands grabbing it, greasy platters, bones tossed on the floor. Dogs circling on the foot, picking up drips of stew. No four. Those aren't quite caught on yet, so everything is eating with fingers or knives, and then those fingers wipe off on the nearest fabric. Sometimes the fabric is clothing. Sometimes it's someone else's sleeve. Hello sleeves. Rally. Go back to the guard road for a moment because it gets weirder. Some noble store that close in or near the garden. Why? Because the smell of ammonia from the urine helped to keep the moths away. Prevention. You're trying to picture a lady's velvet gown hanging beside an open hole to a pit of collective digestion. When your brain is screaming. But this was real. And that it's way practical. Quirky. 1. King Edward I of England was said to have commissioned a luxury garden with a padded seat in a small window overlooking the garden. So yes, you could admire the tulips while emptying your bowels directly onto the unsuspecting earth below. Throne for a king, quite literally. There's some scholarly discussion about just how common guard roads were versus more plastic solutions like chamber pots or simple outhouses. Some historians argue that the majestic castle guard rope has been romanticized, vilified by later writers. Others maintain that these systems were real, widely used, as horrifyingly smelly as the records suggest. The truth probably depends on the size of the castle. The wealth of the owner, and how many guests they were trying to impress before their nostrils turned inside out. Noble resident of the stone-centered kingdom, make your way to the guardrail after dinner. It's a cold, echoey room with a small hole over the pit, a pile of straw or master wipe with. Add a rope to hold on to if you want to avoid falling in, because yes, that happened. falling into the wasted. Wasn't just a nightmare dot, it was a real occupational hazard. Some unlucky servants and drunk guests met their end this way. Remember to not for their valor dot, but for that tragic and aromatic X. You try not to breathe through your nose, do what you came to do, and leave quickly. Boots squelching on the slightly damp flagstones. Later, as you climb into your bedchamber, dot, how many mildly smoky, slightly musty, you wrap yourself in. Turn off bitten furs and try not to think about the river of waste flowing somewhere beneath your floorboard. Dot, in the morning, you'll splash a bit of scented vinegar on your neck and face. Maybe douse your clothes with a perfume clo dot and pretend that you're not living inside a glorified outhouse with flags. Dot, will the majesty of feudal Europe. Dot, and all the smells of a particularly unlucky stable. Let's pause a moment and take a deep imaginary. Not a real one, unless you've got a lavender sachet strapped to your face, because by now your senses have been through the ringer. You brave chamber pots, open sewers, rotting meat markets, the uniquely offensive scent of, but here's the truly terrifying part. Devil people didn't seem to mind, or at least they didn't act like it. That nose-wrinkling, eye-watering stew of bodily fluids and animal entrails we've been swimming through. They were largely nose-blind, too. Welcome to the great medieval factory desensitization. Now, don't misunderstand. They could smell. I want physiologically different from. They have the same olfactory receptors, the same neurological wiring, senses to adapt, shut down entirely. Dot. It's not so much that they liked the smells. Dot, is that they didn't register them as extraordinary. They left nose first in an atmosphere we would describe as biohazardous, and they just called it Tuesday. Dot, picture a child born into a small medieval town. Dot, from the moment they emerge, likely in a room with poor ventilation, sweating midwives, and a lot of. They're absorbing the ambient aroma of a world with no plumbing, no refrigeration, and a very relaxed. Dot, attitude about meat. That's the baseline. They're normal. Dot. They single quotes read. Dot, by the time they're sick. They have watched animals defecate in the street. Dot, help scrub blood of their family's butcher stool, and stepped over more than one decomposing rat without a second thought. Dot, by 16, they probably carry their own unique OD. And last Tuesday. Dot, your nose freshly transported from the modern era. Put mutiny in moments, but the noses, they adapt. Gradually, smell became a background noise, something acknowledged only when it became truly offensive, like, say, a festering wound or a 5-day-old corpse wedged behind a woodpile. Dot. It took a lot to rise above the olfactory threshold in medieval life, but this desensitization had consequences. People didn't notice when things started to rot until it was dangerously late. Dot, add. Dot, foul water. Dot, add some vinegar and hope. Dot, when smelling off. Probably just humor is acting up. Dot, and what disease did start spreading. It was harder to identify the warning signs because the baseline already smelled like a mild apocalypse. That said, people still associated with morality and health, even if they didn't react to everyday filth. Dot, they were quick to assign meaning to unfamiliar or extreme odors. A strange new smell might mean spiritual corruption. If it was really unpleasant. Dot, which. Dot, some people genuinely believed that bad smells could indicate demonic influence. The devil, in popular belief, stank like sulfur. And. Dot, if your neighbor's house began to smell worse than usual, suspicions rose. Turn on the flip side, sweet-smelling people were often assumed to be virtuous, or even holy. There are saints said to have admitted pleasant fragrances even after death. These odors of the body was blessed, not decomposing. Dot, in some cases fragrant. Corpses were paraded through towns as proof of divine favor. Imagine being so nose-blind that you think of floral-scented cadaver as something to celebrate. Dot, is a quirky dead. Some medieval homes were constructed with special chimney flues. Dot, and airflow designs, intended to carry smells away from living spaces. They didn't always work, but the effort was there. Dot, in cities, neighborhoods, were built upwind of tanneries and marketplaces whenever possible. The idea was to strategically avoid smell, not eliminate it. Even city planners, such as they were, understood that stench had direction. Travelers, especially those from other regions, noticed and commented on the smell of towns they visited. Merchants arriving from cleaner ports described inland cities as choking with the smell of filth and fish. Religious pilgrims noted the pungent incense of sin and livestock. It's possible that moving between areas with different stench profiles was finally look up people's noses. And let's not forget the role of seasons. In winter, the cold masks some of the worst smell. Freezing over waste pits and muting decay become spring and summer. Everything thaw, everything steamed. The sun baked the streets until the effluvia of the last 6 months emerged like some vengeful ghost. It was so bad in some places. Is the chronicles referred to summer as the reeking time. Fun. That single quotes as the title of a poem. No one ever wrote for obvious reasons. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how conscious people were of the smells around them. Some argue that the medieval world had a different relationship with central together, that it was more symbolic than sensory. Smell was about meaning. What pleasurable. Others insist that people did notice the stench. Play just lock the tools and infrastructure to do anything about it. Think of it like being stuck on a long-haul flight next to someone eating tuna. You're not okay with it. You're just helpless. You, of course, are the 14th century version of a hypersensitive outsider. Your nose still flinches when you enter a crowded room. Your eyes water every time you pass a stable. In your dreams are haunted by the smell of wet wool left to dry on a smoking hearth. Everyone else, they don't even blink. The town priest greets you with a breath that could knock out a goat. The tavern maid serves you a bowl of pottage with a wink. A hand that still smells faintly of pickled eel. The local blacksmith hasn't changed his tunic since Easter. And yet no one says a thing. At first you gag silently, then you hold your breath. Then gradually, you stop noticing. It doesn't smell good, of course, but it becomes normal. The kind of nose equilibrium sets. You learn to ignore it, or at least price for. Your gag reflex relax. Your brain waves a white flag and adjusts the dial down to taller. And that's my poor friend is how the medieval world wins. Note 3 sanitation, or air fresheners, but through pure unrelenting exposure. Over time, your nose gives up. You no longer back to the stink of humanity pressed too closely together. You've been nose blind initiated. You've adapted. And honestly, that might be the most terrifying part of all. As night falls over your bustling little medieval village, it's finally time to go home. Kick off your shoes, or more accurately your thick leather things, crusted with weeks of mystery. And crawl into bed. You think, peace out. But not so fast. Because bedtime in the Middle Ages wasn't about drifting off in lavender-scented sheets after a hot shower. It was about accepting that your mattress actually be alive. But metaphorically. Literally. With bugs. Your. If you're lucky. Is a wooden frame with a rope lattice and a sack stuffed with straw. Well, maybe dried moss. If you're really lucky, someone replaced the straw in the last few months. But usually. It's been there for compressing into a grimy, lumpy mat that smells like sweat. Animal dander. The long, slow death of fabric. The bedding is charred. Sometimes with your spouse. Sometimes with siblings. Sometimes with everyone in your family, depending on how small your house is. Privacy is a modern invention. Zoe's personal space. And then there are your nighttime companions. Lice, fleas. Lights on bed. Bug. In the medieval sense, they were just part of the bedding ecosystem. Lice crawl through your hair and into your seams. Fleas left between bodies like tiny circus performers. On bed bugs nestled deep in the creases of your mattress, waiting for you to exhale so they could make their move. You didn't fight these creatures, you tolerated them. You Scratch. You occasionally change your undershirt. If you were really determined, you might hang your mattress outside in the sun. I hope the heat baked a few of them into oblivion. People didn't even have words for infestation the way we do now. Instead, they had polite terms, like companions or hitches. It was just understood that if your bed didn't have something crawling in it, you probably have the plague or already dead. Even nobles weren't immune. Royal bedding might be embroidered and scented with herbs. At the moment it was laid out on a warm body for more than an hour. It was fair game for tiny squatters. Monarch Scratch, like the rest of us, smells of medieval beds was something else entirely. Bedding absorbed everything: sweat, spilled food. Fire, smoke. The occasional bodily function. And because laundering full bedding was nearly impossible without destroying it, people did what they could. They just accepted that it now smelled like a cross between damp wool and foot soup. Some families scattered dried lavender or wormwood in their bedding to try and ward off fleas. Others relied on smoke, literally holding sheets over a smoky fire to cleanse them. The result? A charming blend of mothball meets campfire meets. Arm. Now that's for pajamas. Those didn't exist. You or the slept in the same. Clothes you wore during the day. Will strip down to your under. If you were particularly fancy, you might own a nightshirt. But more often than not, people bundled up in whatever kept them warm. Multiple layers of linen wool, sometimes even a hooded cloak, all piled under a rough blanket or a tattered fur. You didn't care how it looked. You care if it kept your toes from turning blue. Quirky detail of the night. Some people slept with hot stones tucked into a cloth. I'm placed at the foot of the bed. To keep their legs. Other. Especially in country. Homes slept next to small animals. Not because they were lonely. Because goats and dogs produce body heat. If you've ever cuddled with a farm animal under a single ratty blanket in a cold room, full of fleas. Then congratulations. You've nailed medieval comfort. Now let's talk about the bedroom air. Medieval home wasn't insulated. There were gaps in the walls. No real windows, just shutters. Good. Fires went, especially if fuels. Gas. So the room was cold and damp and smelled like stale air. And the contents of the chamber, pot tucked under your bed. Remember that. Still. Unless you empty it every morning, it'll start greeting you with its own brand of nasal aggression by night 2. Oh yes, the chamber pot. Position closed for nighttime. Used because who wants to stumble through a freezing yard in bare feet? Tool. Train. If you are discreet, you use it quickly and slide it back under the bed. If not, you might knock it over. And then your mattress isn't just uncomfortable, but the smell of ammonia and shame. There's actually a scholarly discussion about how people perceived sleep quality back then. It wasn't like today. Uninterrupted hours is. People slept in segments. You doze off for a few hours, wake in the middle of the night to tend the fire. Maybe say a prayer or stir the soup. Then go back to sleep. Until dawn. Some even use this first sleep and second sleep. To meditate or sneak out to commit light miss. Whether you are asleep or not, you are definitely sharing your bed with more than just your thoughts. You tonight trying to sleep. You've just scratched your scalp for the 5th time. Something rustled in the straw beneath your mattress. Probably just a mouse. Possibly you're wrapped into threadbare wool blankets. What's the smell like? They were washed last during a full moon. You don't even remember. The fire has died. Your toes are cold. Your face is warm from your own breath. What's the trapped under the blank? You roll over and nudge your sibling who mumbles, and a flea bites your ankle. You sigh. Outside it's quiet. The village. Dogs bark once then. You hear the wind rattle the shutters. Inside. Your nose begins to forget the smells. Stale air. The old sweat. The faint barnyard aroma of your bedding. Play blurred. Together. You breathe shallowly, your eyes closed. And in that strange flea-bitten limbo, between waking and sleep, you realize this is normal. This is what bedtime smells like. Not comfort. Existence. Corners of medieval life where things got truly visceral. Child. Forget. Modern hospitals, prenatal vitamins, and peppermint-centered essential oils. In the Middle Ages, bringing a baby into the world was a gamble wrapped in blood, sweat, and screaming. Not in the figurative. Put in the literal. Punch you in the face with your eyelids kind of way, because childbirth wasn't just dangerous. It was also profoundly unsanitary. Let's set the scene. The dimly lit room in a drafty cottage or upper floor chamber. Play running water. No sterile tools. Just wooden walls soaked with years of smoke and moisture. The windows are shut tight. Not for privacy. Remember, miasma. They thought fresh air could invite in evil spirits or plague-bearing breezes. So they seal the room. And let the sweat and fear stew in their own juices. The smell hits before the first scream. Earth. Like old meat and panic. The birthing bed is usually just a straw mattress, laid flat or slightly inclined, covered in coarse linen. It's been reused many times. My sister's cousin's mother's. Possibly livestock. Sheets are boiled if you're lucky, but most. What's the time they simply beaten clean and laid out again? Around the bed gather a Midwest. A few female relatives or neighbors, and maybe an unlucky husband who's either too worried to leave. Go to shock the move. There are no gloves. No. Just hands cold. What's hot water. And a whole lot of shout. As the labor drags on, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, the room begins to transform. Body sweat. The birthing woman often vomits from pain or panic. Urine and feces mix with the fluids of childbirth. Midwives encourage the mother to drink wine or ale for strength, which doesn't help with the mess when she throws it all back up onto the rushes covering the floor. Someone might burn herbs like sage or juniper, not because they think it smells nice, but because they believe the smoke keeps demons away. It doesn't. But it does add another layer to the stifling choking center of the room. And when the baby finally comes. The event is equal parts triumph and trauma. There's blood. A lot. There are. Sometimes silence. The baby is swaddled. Immediately, but not. Just wiped down with whatever cloth is closest. Anything a newborn was risky, they believed. The baby's skin was sacred, not to be touched by cold water too soon lest illness strike. Meanwhile, placenta is expelled and dealt with. However the local tradition dictates. Some bury it under the hearth. Others burn. And in a few darker corners of folk medicine, parts of it are used in potions. Really. Nothing went to waste to. After delivery. The real test begins. The purifying pur. A woman who had just given birth was considered spiritually and physically unclean. 40 days she stayed indoors, often in the same room, recovering in isolation with the baby. This was both a spiritual tradition and, unintentionally, one of the smartest postnatal infection control practices they ever had. It was called CHURCAING. At the end of the 40 days, the mother would be richly welcomed back into church. Readmitted to society. Until then she was stuck in that same dark room with soiled linens, leaking wounds, the crying newborn. And all the delightful fragrances that came with them. I know the baby wasn't the only one soiling things. Postpartum bleeding lasted for weeks. There were no pads. Just wanted linen, our sheep's wool stuff between the legs, and changed. Again, if someone thought to boil water and had time between fetching firewood and trying not to die of infection, midwives sometimes used wine or vinegar to clean the mother. Imagine the bird. Quick. Read. Some traditions believe that evil spirits or the devil himself could sneak in during childbirth and swap a healthy baby with a chang. To ward off these swaps, families might hang on shears above the bed. Keep a candle burning all night. Will sprinkle blessed salt around the. So not only did you have to survive child, you have to supervise it for demonic activity. No pressure. There's scholarly debate about the mortality rates for childbirth. In the Middle Ages, some believe it was astronomically high, while others argue that most healthy women survived if the birth was uncomplicated and attended by an experienced midwife. But everyone agrees on this dot. It was dangerous, exhausting, profoundly unsunee to dot for every safe delivery. There was another plagued by infection that no amount of praying or pulses could fix. For tonight at the Midwest, you've been summoned by a neighbor banging on your door before dawn. The mother is already moaning, sweat pouring from her face. You step into the birthing room and the heat hits like a wave dot. It smells of copper, sour ale smoke, and desperation. You kneel beside the bed, murmuring calming words and get to work. Your hands are stained, and your knees a dot, and your eyes sting from the smoke. Time passes in a haze of effort and noise. When the baby finally arrives, Dave's purple and screaming, you cut the cord with a dull knife and wrap it quickly dot, then turn your attention to the mother. She's exhausted, shaking. You wipe her fore between her thighs and pray her bleeding slowed. The room is heavy with breath and fluids and exhaustion. You crack a window, just a bit, enough to let in some air and maybe release the ghosts. Not later, when you walk home at sunrise, your hands still. You'll wash them with cold water dot crash, but the smelling is under your nails. Not yet, because you've seen what survival looks like and what it smells like, and you'll be back again soon. There's always another birth, another scream, another room full of blood and incense and unrelenting stink. Let's take a moment to turn our noses towards something less bloody, but just as aromatic in its own special way. Medieval food. Preparation. Now you might be thinking, at least this part smells better. It's food. Sure, on a good day when the kitchen's humming. The roast pig hasn't fallen into the fire pit, mouth watering, spice stew, sizzling, fat, fresh baked bread. That is, until you realize none of it's been refrigerated. The meat was probably green this morning. The cooking area doubles as a petting zoo with ambition. First we enter the kitchen, not a tidy galley with white tile and polished copper pans, but a large soot-blackened room tucked somewhere near the edge of the manor or castle, because kitchens burn down all the time. You don't put open flames next to your feasting hole unless you're planning on hosting a surprise funeral. Inside, the heat is stifling, especially in summer. There's no chimney, just a hole in the ceiling. If you're lucky, the air, like with smoke and the distant lingering note of boiled cabbage. Something's always simmering, roasting, smoking, or burning, usually all at once. The floor is slick with old drippings, flour, fish scales, and whatever the dog brought in. Speaking of dogs, there's always at least two in the kitchen licking up scraps, barking at the cook while dragging a stolen ham across the flagstones. Chickens cluck on the foot. Can I pick, maybe tied in the corner, winking resentfully as it contemplates both its fate and the stench of its surroundings. Now let's talk about ingredients. Meat, if you've got it, is often past its prime. Preservation methods of bass drawing, but only work if done correctly. And even then, a salted joint of beef left too long can develop a crust that's more mystery than muscle. Smell. Tiny, sometimes sweet in the wrong way. Meat that's just about to turn, already has, is often served. Anyway, the heavily spiced sauces. If you can't stop the meat from rotting, drown it in cinnamon, cloves, garlic, or vinegar until your guests stop asking questions and stop drinking more aldot. And let's not forget fish. Inland villages receive their supply days after the catch. Cottage in barrels, packed in salt, and herring with staples, especially during fasting seasons. Smell. Imagine a fish market has been left in the sun for a weekend. Now imagine that scent wafting through your kitchen. Is the fish are cleaned with knives that haven't seen hot water in months. Lovely. Even the safe foods have their issues. Dairy, for example, dot milk turned fast and sour. Book, called clapper dot, was often consumed because tossing it out was unthink. Cheese was hard and salty. Butter was homemade, and it reeked of the cow, the churn, and the hands that made it. The more rural the household, the more flavorful the butter became. Sometimes, people added herbs to mask that flavor, sometimes they just powered through it. Add vegetables, root, crops kept. Onions, leeks, garlic, turnips, and all of them are known for a certain. Are combined with cabbage, which was every and you had a gas-filled. Sulphurous delight stewing in pots so old the iron flaked into your spices if you could afford them. Callfolk may do with wild herbs, while the rich imported saffron and nutmeg, which they used in absurd quantities to prove they could. One of the strangest aromas came from medieval baking. Fresh bread smelled good. Yes, put baking happened once a week. Turn the brightness to . So by day, your life was hard. Slightly moldy, I may have been gnawed on by rats during the night. When you toasted it over the fire to revive it, the mold burned off and created a sour, dusty smell that clung to your clothes. Bon app. Quirky fact time. Medieval. Cooks sometimes used fake ingredients. There's a whole genre of dishes where food was disguised to look like something else. Think meatballs painted with saffron to resemble golden fruit. Or pies filled with live birds. Yes, that nursery rhyme had historical truth. Why? Partly for entertainment. Partly because you weren't always sure what you were being served. If it looked good and smelled spicy, you probably just kept eating, and I hope your intestines could handle. There's a scholarly debate about how safe medieval food really was. Some argue that people developed stronger digestive systems due to regular exposure to microbes. What others suggest food poisoning was a constant unspoken companion. Chronic stomach complaints were widespread. But if you made the connection between bad meat and bad health. Instead, the blame went to wet humors. Hot liver. My favorite scapegoat Mayas. You today are on kitchen duty. You're turning a spit over the fire, roasting a leg of something that may have been a deer. Women have been caught stealing turnips from the manna garden. Either way, the smell is intense. Grease hitting fire, meat sizzling, and that faint edge of spoilage masked by garlic and wild rossum. The cook yells at you to stir the cabbage pot. You do, reluctantly. Play. Gang slightly at the bubbling mass of green and gray leaves. That's more texture than vegetable. Dinner is served on coarse wooden trenches. Share my 4 people. Tearing off meat. And dipping bread in a sauce so vinegar it makes your eyes water. Someone burps loudly, no one flinches. It's just part of the ambience. You can't stand your portion. Realize. It's still steaming. But not from heat. From activity. You pick around the edge. And try not to inhale too deeply. Later you help scrub pots using sand and cold water. The grease clings stubbornly. You try not to touch the congealed globs stuck in the corner of the cauldron. You don't know what it is. No. 1. The scallion shrugs and throws some more rash on. The potluck's clean enough. And when you finally walk out into the cold night, the smoke cleaned your hair, your tunic reeking of onions and goat fat. Johann, stained with something yellowish. You take a deep breath of the outside. Air. Smells like manure and burning wood. And somehow. It's refreshing. Because inside dinner just happened. And no matter what they tell you about medieval cuisine being flavorful and rustic and quaint. It was also a fire hazard. Digestive gamble. And 9 times out of 10 just plain. That's wonder. Outside again. This time into the realm of public festivals and celebrations. Well, the whole town gathers to dance, drink, feast, and forget their problems for a while. Music fills the air. Colored. Banners flap overhead. Pigs roast on spits. And people are drunk by noon. Sounds delightful, right? Little chaotic maybe, but cheer. Until you stop breathing through your nose. concentrates the raw essence of medieval humanity, quite like a party. 1,000 people packed into a muddy square, wearing that week-old TUN.next guzzling owl, and relieving themselves wherever they please. Ah yes, the sweet scent of merriment and microbial mayhem. You arrive at the Mayday Festival. This music, hoodie-goodies, flutes, bagpipes, when people clapping and spinning around the NAYPOLE.GARLANDES of crushed flowers in the hair. Bees occasionally circling a little too close to the fun. Someone hands you a cup of ale that tastes vaguely like vinegar and old socks. It's war. Naturally, you're not politely insipid anyway, because that's what everyone's doing. The scent of roasted meat. Watch through the square. That's the good part. Lamb turning over a fire, dripping fat onto the coal, sending up puffs of mouth-watering smoke. Play laid on the cast of the smells that don't come from food. Act crowd radiating body heat and week-old sweat. The wet dog odor of sheepskin clo. The scent of damp walls slowly steaming in the sun. Someone steps beside you and raises their arms to cheer. Your face is now squarely in their armpit zone. You try not to flin. They smell like hard labor and dried fish. You pretend to sneeze and pivot away. The streets are lined with vendors shouting about pie sweetmeats, honey diamonds, and fried dough. The food smells delicious. Until you realize it's been sitting out for hours, and the flies are doing their best to own a share of it. One pastry looks like it's growing a light fuzz. You politely pass. Then there's the beer tent. Really more of a bay area, filled with barrels swaying towns, and the distinct smell of spilled alcohol baking in the sun. This is also where you'll find a mix of other uninvited aromas. Vomit, stale bread. Am I ever present? Tang of urine. Because where are the toilet? If you need to go, you do what everyone else does. You find a wool, a bush, or a ditch. Sometimes. When the lines get too long or the ale hits too hard, people don't make it. The result is a kind of ambient human funk that makes you wish your nose had a dial. You could turn down to mild horror. Now, for those who really committed to the festival. Spirit things. LUSA. Children run barefoot through puddles of things that definitely aren't rainwater. Animals are everywhere. Goats, tethered to. What's dogs fighting over bones. The chicken that may or may not be involved in a betting game. Lots of horses. All of whom are, of course, pooping freely. There's a boy with a shovel trying to clear but he's mostly just smearing it around with the flair of an abstract artist. And yet the people are smiling. Laugh. Shouting. They barely seem to notice the stench they've dressed in there, which, to be fair, means a ton. Many have tried to freshen. Women wear gallons of rosemary or rose petals around there. Men dab themselves with scented oils or rub their hands with herbs. Someone even walked by with a little bag of crushed cloves hanging from their belt like an ancient air freshener. It helps. Slightly. Quirky. Dead. Some festivals had contests for best. People made commanders. Little balls of wax herbs and resins, and waterman chains around their necks or belts. Judges would sniff each entrant like they were choosing a prize. TR. A commander that could mask the surrounding filth for more than a few minutes. Worth its weight in gold. Now come evening things. Take a turn. The sun goes down, the ale goes up, and inhibitions fall like rotten apples. Drunken singing fills the square, often off-key and always enthuse. People dance. Some pass out near the fire. A few couples stumble off behind carts into shadowy corn. Just don't bother hiding. Modesty is a luxury when the town's swimming in meat. In the streets already. So filthy, it can't get worse. Fire. The air grows thick with smoked and roasted meat and sway. People find themselves with dirty hats. The scent of rosemary wilts, overtaken by the sour heat. What's one? Bodies. Somewhere. Someone throws up in a barrel. No one moves the barrel. Does some academic back and forth? about how much medieval people really enjoyed these festivals. This is injured the amount of tradition and obligation. Some historians see them as a release valve for society, a way to blow off steam in a world otherwise offered very little joy. Others argue that many townspeople dreaded the chaos, the smell, the danger of overcrowding and drunken brawls. Either way they happened. Stinking, sweating, snacking, singing, because what else are you going to do? As the night winds down, you find yourself perched on a barrel knot. Watching the last dance of spin in the fire. Your clothes reek of smoke and sweat and mystery grease from a eat pie that exploded in your hand. Your shoes are muddy. Your nose is tired. You smell like the village. You are the village. And the village in this moment smells like life. Overwhelming, absurd, and slightly fermented. You walk home under a moonlit sky, passing other festival goers, slumped against trees, snoring softly. The air is finally cool. The west of the smells settled behind you. Play lingers, still clinging to your tunic, your hair, your skin. A souvenir of celebration. And when you crawl into your bug-riddled bed, you close your eyes and realize you didn't even notice the fleas tonight. The festival did what it was meant to do. Distract you from everything else. Now, let's dive into the most elite, perfumed, pampered, and theoretically spotless segments of medieval society. The clergy. You'd think that monks, nuns, and priests, devoted as they were to God, prayer, and ritual cleanliness, might have smelled slightly better than the average mud-covered peasant. After all, they spent their days reading Latin, not shoveling manure. But alas, the life of holy devotion didn't necessarily mean a life of sweet-smelling. Religious spaces carried their own particular bouquet. 1 part ink, 1 pot candle, and 10 parts very old, very sweaty humanity, living in close quarters under vows of poverty, and crucially limited bathing. We begin at the monastery, where the stone halls echo with quiet chants and the distant creak of wooden sandals. Monks live communally. Sleep in dormitories. Eat in silence. Wake me before dawn. The daily lives are deeply structured. Pras meal study work. The physical hygiene isn't always top of the list. Depending on the order. Is the discouraged or scheduled so in fray. Wake me, it's basically a holiday. Some. What's the rules? Permitted bathing only a few times a year. Easter being a popular option. The rest of the time, monks focused on the purification of the soul, not the body. The bodies, they showed it. The typical monk's wardrobe was a wool hab, worn every day, rain or shine. With linen underclothes, if resources allowed. These robes were rarely washed. Chipotle out of practicality. And partly out of ascetic belief that enduring this set root one closer to so the smell pungent. Dump like a burlap sack left in a barn for a few seasons and then wrapped around someone fasting on cabbage and beans. Living in a community of men who don't bathe, don't change clothes often. Live off a diet of legumes and boiled grains. You start to see where this is going. The dormitory, long cold and lined with straw mattresses, becomes an olfactory war zone by midnight. The air is thick with the scent of unwashed breathe, laced with sour ale and silence. And the unmistakable aroma of fermented prayer. You might be thinking, but surely churches smelled better. Incense was a major part of the religious experience, especially in Catholic services. Frankincense and other sweet-smelling resins were burnt honor the divine, inconveniently to cover up the stink of dozens. 100 of BOD. It's packed into a tight, echoey space. Churches didn't have. Fidgeted and occasionally fainted. Call Ashley from the heat, partially from the smell. Quirky detail. During long services, people often brought herbs or scented cloths to hold near their faces. What is active vanity but to survive the atmosphere? Some even made little smell cushions stuffed with lavender or hyssop. you have to press to their noses. It was the medieval version of portable air. Freshener.1 that occasionally doubled as a parade dot in case you were praying for deliverance. From the guy next to you. Nuns, for their part, we usually more hygienic dot at least on paper. Some orders emphasize cleanliness as part of their routines. Like the Benedictines. Add rules requiring regular washing of hands and faces. Do it again. Full baths. Convents often had better access to herbal gardens and clean linens, which nuns used to create their own. Soaps and tonics. These could smell quite nice. Even if the people using them still wore the same dress for a month. But despite all the chanting and washing of feet, church officials weren't immune to the same bodily realities as everyone else. Pilgrims arrived at holy sites with blisters, and all the smells of weeks on the road. The clergy had to tend to them, sometimes by the hundreds. Medieval hospitals, often run by religious orders, were filled with the sick, the injured, and the dying, all in one large open ward. Think of the herbal salves mixed with rotting flesh sway. What's blood and incense? One contemporary observer called it the breath of devotion and poet. But not. Now in terms of spiritual. A good smell was associated with purity, grace, and even sainthood. A bad smell. Corruption. Moral decay. There are records of saints said to exude sweet aromas even in death. Like roses or spices. Conversely. During execution as a sign of divine judgment. Let's be honest. Mike. Just mean they hadn't bathed since the last crusade. The scholarly debate over how much hygiene was practiced in monasteries compared to secular homes. Some evidence suggests monastic bathhouses existed, especially on wealthier abbey. Others like you, these were rare exceptions. What's cleanliness was a distraction from spiritual discipline. What is clear though, is the religious communities developed complex rituals around washing. Feed on Holy Thursday hands before meals. But rarely extended those to full body scrub. Clean hands, dirty everything else. Today, you're attending morning prayers at a local priory. The church is cold. Dark and lit only by the flickering orange of bees. As you file in with the other townspeople, the smell hits. Melting. Next. Step will. And the warm, slightly bitter scent of human presence. The priest greets you with breath that suggests skip to the vinegar. You. Inhale through your. And find your place in the crowd. Behind you. Someone. Rattling. The woman beside you found herself with her prayer book. The monk at the front swings the censer and sweet smoke rolls out in waves, cutting through the human haze like a perfume sword. For a moment, the church smells almost holy, like incense in fresh herbs. But it doesn't last. The body always wins. Off to the service you're invited to eat in the prior's guest hall. The food is simple lentils, bread, wheat kale. The monks eat silently, heads bow. One scratches under his hood. Another shifts uncomfortably in his robe. The air is thick with the scent of boiled vegetables, wool, and oil lamps. Someone slurps. No one speaks. You chew quietly and try not to inhale too. Later, when you leave, you pass the communal latrine. Off, long bench with holes, built over a running stream that's only running sometimes. Smells exactly like you expect. You keep walking. Outside, the wind hits your face. It smells like manure and mud. But compared to what's inside, it's crescent. Refreshing. Do you realize as you walk back down the path from the priory? But even the most pious lives were lived in close contact with dirt. Holiness didn't smell like lil. It smelled like effort, like penance, like feet and worn ab sandals. So here we are, at the tail end of your nasal pilgrimage through medieval filth and funk. And you might be wondering, who's the oldest bad? Short answer, yes. Longer answer, also yes, but with layers. Trudge through the stench of disease, body odor, spoiled food, and open latrines. They were also believe it, or not trying to stay clean, trying to smell good, trying to make sense of hygiene in a world without toothpaste or tile cleaner. And this brings us to the final chapter of our grimy saga, the medieval attempt at cleanliness, the fumbling, fragrant, and often futile war against stench. Let's begin with the tooth situation. Dental hygiene in the Middle Ages was not a mix of folk remedies and desperate improvisation. There were no toothbrushes. Not really. Some people used frayed sticks or chewed on herbs like mint, sage, or even parsley. How does rub their teeth with a cloth dipped in wine or vine? Powdered charcoal was popular for whitening. And also for grinding away an animal. And yet, medieval skulls often show surprisingly good teeth. At least among the lower classes. Let's sugar. No gummy bears, no sod. The diets were awful for variety. What decent for avoiding cavities. Put. Oh, that was another story. No matter how much mint you chew. If your meals consisted of salted fish, pickled onions, and boiled cabbage. Your breath was going to come out swinging. People try to mask it with cloves, myrrh, or dried orange peel tucked into cheek pouches. Essentially medieval gum. Aha! Noble might even carry a commander near their face at all times. Not just a Waldorf disease. Unconscious. Washington Gardens was a monumental task. Usually reserved for a few times a year. When the dirt could no longer be ignored. Woolen garments couldn't be scrubbed or boiled. They shrink into dull-sized tunics. So they were brushed, had out, or beaten with stick. Linen underclothes were a little easier to wash. So people focused on changing those more. Wealthy households had laundry. Poor folks had a river or rock, and their own two hands. Soap existed, but it wasn't gentle or luxurious. It was made from animal fat and lye, and it smelled like the ingredients that came from bitter and a little like sadness. If you were fancy, you might have soap scented with herbs, but for the average person, cleanliness came with a price. Open coins and in burnt skin. And then there was a herbal warriors, the everyday efforts to smell less like decay and more like a meadow after rain. Lavender, rosemary, thyme, and sage with the greatest hits of the medieval deodorizing. People tied bundles of herbs to their belts, tucked them into clothing folds, will scatter them across rush-covered floors. Some even sew little scent pouches into their cancel call. Personal fragrance was its own little revolution. Perfume. Usually oil-based. Are imported from the Eastern, made from resin, spices, and flowers. I need the rich could afford them, but even they didn't use perfume in the way we do. Pulse points was Rob Thomas gloves, dab into handkerchiefs, will drizzled onto hand towels used before and after meals. You didn't last scent to be seductive. You wore it to declare that you weren't currently rotting. Quickie note. People also believed certain scents could protect you from illness. What's the current plague? Vinegar was used to rinse hands. Wipe down furniture, and even dabbed onto faces. One popular remedy involved soaking a sponge in vinegar and herbs, then wearing it in a glass pendant around your neck. Others just wore garlic. Talked to Waldorf vampires, but because it stinks so strongly it was believed to know me. Asthma could get through. Effective? Probably not. But dedication, bathing itself, wasn't entirely abandoned. There were stretches of history, particularly before the Black Death, when public bathhouses flourished. They were social hubs, when men and women sometimes bathed together. Awkward. Chat food, and paid extra for scented oils. Golf house attendants offered massages, music, and hot drinks. It sounds downright spa. Until the plague hits and everyone decided bathhouses were pest. By the late medieval period, the idea of full body washing became suspicious again, especially in water. There's some debate in academic circles about just how often people bathe. Certain records suggest some medieval Europeans bathed more than their 18th century descendants. Others point out that while kings may have had personal bathing, the average peasant might see a full tub once or twice a year. And then there's the semantic confusion. Did washing mean a full bath? Well, just rinsing your hands and face. The texts don't always clarify. And historians love a good footnote. Today. Finally decided enough is enough. You're going to bath. You feel a wooden tub in the center of your one-room home, pouring in buckets of lukewarm water carried from the well. Into the bath you toss some herbs, lavender, marjoram, maybe a few flower petals. What's for flat? You even like a candle. As you lower yourself into the water, it sloshes onto the floor. It's not comfortable. The wood creaks. You smell smoke from the fire mold, from the floor, rushes, and a faint hint of yourself. Self, despite your best. But still, you feel cleaner. You scrub with a rough cloth. Splash water onto your face. Suck for a few minutes. Watch the lice. Retreat. The scent of rosemary wraps around you like a spell. Afterward, you dry off with a coarse toe. Pull the used water out behind the house. Feel something you haven't felt in weeks. Light your skin feels or touch. You dress in your cleanest tunic, still stained, but less stiff. And comb your hair with fingers rubbed in rosemary oil. When you step outside, the town still smells like itself. Coal smoke, damp wool, manure, and mystery meat simmering in someone's heart. But you smell just a little bit different. Not clean, maybe. But and in this world, that's all you can ask. Because for all that superstition, confusion, and misguided hygiene science, medieval people went oblivious. I wanted to smell good. Play. Failed often, but they still tried. You've survived the stench gauntlet. You faced the guardrail, the chamber. The fish caught in the garlic-soaked pay. You've walked through plague. Prat and pickled eels. You smell the Middle Ages and lived to tell about it. And now we've come to the end of our long, pungent journey through the murky mist of medieval hygiene. If your senses haven't completely shut down and self-defense. Congratulations. You're stronger than most. You've braved the fumes of unwashed bodies, the time of spoiled meat stew, the pungent perfume of herbal desperation, and the subtle horror of sleeping next to a chamber pot. You've learned that cleanliness wasn't a given, or even always desirable, depending on the century. In fact, for much of medieval. Being too clean was viewed with suspicion. Like you might be plotting something. Get through it all. These people lived, invented, composed. What is poetry, and raised children, often in the same rooms where animals slept in laundry, died slow. Musty. Play, scrubbed the soles more often than their feet. Play feared bad air, trusted rosemary, and made perfume out of desperation. They built castles with open toilet towers, and still thought silk smelled better when stored next to a chute of human waste. Patrol the grime and odor. There's something oddly comforting in the wrestle. Medieval world was many things. Dangerous, raw, uncomfortable. But it was also resourceful. People adapted. And in a strange way, the history of hygiene is the history of how humanity pushed forward despite the stink. Search tonight. Surrounded by the faint whir of a fan. In the scent of fabric softener. Maybe take a moment to appreciate the little things. Your tooth. You single quotes. Your toilet with plumbing that goes somewhere far, far away. And if you dream of medieval times, try not to breathe too deeply.